Hey guys, tonight we're crawling through cotton fields under a blazing southern sun, brushing dirt off our sleeves as we eavesdrop on the quiet beginnings of a national unraveling. You're sticky with sweat, and there's a buzzing in your ears, not just mosquitoes, but something deeper. Something uneasy. You can almost hear the tension humming under the whir of spinning cotton gins and the chirp of cicadas in Georgia dusk. And fair warning, you probably won't survive this story without rethinking what you learned in 4th grade social studies. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time it is where you're watching from down in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through rows of cotton, sun beating down like it holds a grudge. You're in the deep South, and it's the early 1800s, before war, before Lincoln, before secession even seems real. And yet, the roots are already spreading underground. Cotton isn't just king here. It's an emperor wearing a crown made of money and cruelty. You reach down and touch a soft white bowl, and your fingers brush blood. Not metaphorical blood. Real. The kind scraped from hands that picked it dawn to dusk, enslaved hands that built a billion-dollar empire one linty puff at a time. The South has found its cash crop. Thanks to Eli Whitney's cotton gin, this spiky little contraption that makes cotton processing fast enough to turn drudgery into big business, fields that once barely paid now bloom with promise. So naturally, everyone with land wants in. But cotton is hungry. It eats land, time, and most of all, people. Slavery, which had been slowly declining after the American Revolution, suddenly gets a second wind. You walk past auction blocks on Charleston streets and hear the sharp slap of a gavel. Sold. A man goes one way, his child another. The system needs bodies, and it doesn't ask kindly. It takes. And the North? Well, you might expect them to be yelling "this is wrong" from the rooftops already. But not so fast. You're standing in New York Harbor, and what do you see? Ships. Ships full of cotton bales. Yankee merchants are making bank off southern harvests. Northern textile mills are humming with southern fiber. Wall Street loves cotton almost as much as the plantation owners do. So while some folks start to get loud about abolition, others just quietly count their profits. You glance at the receipts, some northern banks are literally investing in plantations. It's a little like being against fast fashion while scrolling Shine on your lunch break. And that tension, that hypocrisy, starts to build. The US Constitution had already handed the South a quiet set of advantages. Remember that 3/5 compromise? Yeah, enslaved people didn't get to vote, but they still counted just enough to boost Southern power in Congress. It's a dirty trick of math: the more people you own, the more say you get. You shake your head. It's like giving extra monopoly money to the person cheating. Now, zoom out. The whole country's expanding. Louisiana Purchase? Check. Lewis and Clark? Already home. You see settlers spreading west, breaking new ground, planting new crops. And with every new state comes a question that hits like a thunderclap: slave state or free? Historians still argue whether the Civil War was inevitable from the start, but if you stand right here in this field, breathing in the humid air thick with the scent of raw cotton and something uglier, you feel it: a reckoning is growing. You reach the edge of the plantation and glance back. Behind you, black hands harvest wealth they'll never hold. Ahead of you, politicians squabble over territory maps, slicing up futures like pie. And in between, there's you, wide-eyed, trying to figure out how a country that calls itself free is so deeply shackled. A quirky little twist? The South calls slavery a positive good, not just a necessary evil. You hear a voice: John C. Calhoun, former vice president, white hair like ghost smoke. He's speaking in slow, deliberate tones, saying slavery has civilized Africans. You wince. Even some folks in his time think that sounds bonkers. Still, the belief catches on. The Southern elite start wrapping slavery in philosophy, religion, even science. Pseudo-academics whip up false studies proving black inferiority. Ministers quote cherry-picked Bible verses. A whole infrastructure of lies props up the system. You step back, uneasy. It's not just a labor force, it's an ideology. But things aren't all smooth down here. You hear whispers in the quarters after dark. Stories passed down about freedom. Songs that map escape routes north. There's resistance, constant and quiet, rebellions, escapes, slowed work. You don't see it in the ledgers, but it's there. Like a heartbeat. Meanwhile, the North slowly begins to stir. Not all of it, plenty of folks up there are just fine so long as the cotton keeps rolling in, but a growing number of people start saying, this isn't right. Abolitionist newspapers circulate. Underground railroad routes stretch like veins through Ohio and Pennsylvania. But down here in Dixie? That's seen as sedition. You can almost feel the cultural rift forming. You stand in a dusty Virginia courthouse and overhear a judge railing against outside interference. The South starts talking about states' rights, but you know what they really mean. Not the right to tax or pave roads. The right to own people. And the more the North criticizes slavery, the more the South digs in, like a teenager doubling down on a bad haircut just to prove a point. Pride. Power. Profit. It's a deadly triangle. As you walk down a dirt road outside Natchez, Mississippi, you pass a mansion built with white columns and darker secrets. The lady of the house is sipping tea, complaining about the northern busybodies while wearing silk sewn in a New England mill. You raise an eyebrow. A slave patrol rides past, rifle across their lap, scanning the tree line for anyone daring to flee. They nod to you. You pretend not to exist. And here's a peculiar footnote: some poor whites in the South don't even like the planter elite, but they're clinging to their racial superiority like a life vest. Because even if they own nothing, at least they're not enslaved. That hierarchy keeps them in line. You step into a parlor where men argue politics over brandy. They claim the federal government has no right to tell states how to live. The Constitution, they say, protects their way of life. And you want to scream, you mean slavery. Just say it. But no one wants to be the bad guy in their own story. You pass a schoolhouse in Georgia. The lesson on the chalkboard reads, slavery is a natural part of civilization. A boy in the back sketches a cotton flower. You wonder if he'll be marching in a gray uniform before his beard comes in. And meanwhile, back in Washington, lawmakers try to keep the peace with legislation that's basically emotional duct tape. Missouri Compromise. Compromise of 1850. You feel the seam straining. None of it fixes the root. Just buys time. Because cotton is booming. By the 1850s, the US supplies nearly 80% of the world's cotton. Europe is addicted. Britain's entire textile industry leans on American cotton like a drunk on a lamppost. That little white fluff holds global sway. You stare at a cotton bale and realize, this stuff owns people and empires. You pass a group of enslaved workers whispering in Gula, their own hybrid language, preserving pieces of Africa. Culture refuses to die. Even here, resistance flickers. You nod quietly. They nod back. So now you're standing at a crossroads, both literally and historically. The South grows stronger, richer, but also more paranoid. The North grows louder, angrier, but also divided. And no one's blinking. The storm hasn't broken yet. But you smell it in the wind. You're still walking, dust clinging to your boots like unresolved tension, and the road ahead is long, lined with documents, debates, and lawmakers who smile while stuffing powder into a national keg. You've made it out of the cotton fields for now, but don't breathe easy. The halls of Congress may look polished, but inside, the floorboards creak with compromise, and compromise, it turns out, is just delay dressed in diplomacy. This part of the journey isn't bloody. Not yet. It's pencil strokes and paper cuts. But make no mistake, you're wading through a bureaucratic swamp, and beneath its still waters, alligators sleep. You tiptoe into the 1820s, just as the country starts to stretch its limbs. Remember how we bought the Louisiana Territory from France? Well, now the real drama begins. What do we do with all this new land? Enter the Missouri Compromise of 1820, a name that sounds like it belongs in a polite tea party but hits like a sledgehammer. Missouri wants in as a slave state. That sets off panic. Why? Because it would upset the fragile balance between free and slave states in Congress. So what do lawmakers do? They slap together a compromise. Missouri can join as a slave state, Maine will come in as a free state, surprise, Maine's suddenly state-worthy, and, most dramatically, they draw an invisible line across the Western Territory, north of it, no slavery, south, do what you want. Boom. Crisis averted. Sort of. You step back and squint at the map. That line, the 36 degrees 30 minutes parallel, looks harmless, but it's loaded. It's not a solution. It's a countdown. But hey, the country sighs in relief. For now. You hear a Southern senator whisper, "We'll revisit this." And you know he means it. In the background, the US economy's still twirling like a drunk debutante. Cotton exports are booming, railroads are stretching, and new states keep knocking on the Union's front door like trick-or-treaters. And every single time, the same question echoes, slave state or free? You slip into the 1830s, and here comes a doozy, the nullification crisis. South Carolina, yep, the same diva state that'll later stomp out of the Union, starts throwing tantrums over federal tariffs. They call them unfair to the South. And then, boom, they float the idea that states can nullify federal laws. That's like saying, I know I signed the lease, but I'm not paying rent anymore. I've decided I don't believe in rent. President Andrew Jackson, no teddy bear himself, isn't having it. He threatens to send troops. South Carolina backs down. Barely. But the seed is planted. If a state can ignore a federal law, could it eventually just leave the country? Historians still argue whether that was the moment the Union began to splinter. Some say it was just economic theater. Others say it was the first rumble of thunder before the real storm. You're standing there with your metaphorical umbrella and wondering if it'll ever close again. Meanwhile, another issue rears its head like an angry rooster, Texas. You ride into the 1840s and everything's bigger. Texas wins independence from Mexico, then cozy whispers to the US, "Hey, want to annex me?" You already know where this is going. More land equals more questions. Texas is a slave state. Admitting it fuels rage in the North and glee in the South. The annexation sparks the Mexican-American War, which adds a whole new chunk of territory to the map, California, Utah, New Mexico. Suddenly, we're bloated with real estate and every square mile of it is controversial. You're tired just watching the politicians scramble. It's like watching someone try to plug a volcano with bubble gum. Enter the Compromise of 1850, which is less a compromise and more like taping together a torn kite in a hurricane. California comes in as a free state. Utah and New Mexico get to decide for themselves later. Hello, popular sovereignty. And Washington, D.C., the capital of freedom, bans the slave trade, but not slavery itself. That's like removing the menu but keeping the kitchen. Oh, and here's the kicker. The compromise includes the Fugitive Slave Act. You feel the air go cold. This law forces every American, North or South, to help return escaped enslaved people. Even if you're a free Northerner who hates slavery, if a bounty hunter shows up, you're legally obligated to help. You hear the law snap shut like a steel trap. And you hear it echo. Families ripped apart. Free black citizens kidnapped and sold. Northern cities erupt in protests, and more people are pushed off the fence and into the abolitionist camp. Some northern states passed personal liberty laws to try and resist the Fugitive Slave Act. And now you've got states actively fighting federal mandates again. Déjà vu? Yep. South Carolina takes notes. And here's a weird historical nugget. One Boston judge, under pressure from the Fugitive Slave Act, returns a captured man named Anthony Burns back into slavery. The public is so furious they raise money to buy Burns's freedom and succeed. You blink. 1 man. 2 Americas. You peek into a print shop in Pennsylvania. The presses are hot, ink-stained hands are churning out broadsheets. Pamphlets from Frederick Douglass. Essays from William Lloyd Garrison. The abolitionist movement is getting louder, braver, more organized. Still small, but growing like ivy through bricks. And over in the South? Paranoia deepens. You hear whispers about Yankee agitators. You see laws passed to ban anti-slavery literature. Schools in some southern states forbid even discussing abolition. Knowledge becomes a threat. You sit at a debate in the U.S. Senate. A man named Charles Sumner gives a speech denouncing that slave power and insults a Southern senator by name. A few days later, Sumner is beaten unconscious on the Senate floor by that senator's cousin with a cane. The attacker? Praised in the South. St. Cain's engraved with "hit him again." You stare at the blood on the marble floor and realize the violence isn't starting, it's just moved indoors. And still, Congress clings to compromise like a child hugging a worn-out teddy bear. You read transcripts where lawmakers speak in flowery language, calling for unity while actively slicing the country into ideological ribbons. There's a term that gets thrown around a lot: sectionalism. It's the idea that Americans now see themselves less as Americans and more as Southerners or Northerners. You stand in Ohio and hear people scoff at Southern ignorance. You stand in Georgia and hear people spit about Yankee arrogance. You start to wonder if the center can even hold. Oh. And let's not forget Kansas. It's coming. The fire next time. But for now, you walk the long, echoing halls of 1850s government, watching compromise after compromise stitch up wounds with thread soaked in oil. The flame hasn't hit yet, but you can smell the smoke. And before you think this is all about politics and law books, you glance around at everyday people, immigrants in New York, farmers in Indiana, slaves praying in Mississippi. They're all living inside this growing tension without knowing what's coming. Just trying to survive. Just trying to live. You feel the ground harden beneath you. Something is building. Not just in Washington or on plantations or behind printing presses, but in the soul of the country. And no one has the words for it yet. So they settle for the only one they can agree on: compromise. You shake your head. Because you know compromise only works when both sides want peace more than power. And power, right now, has the louder voice. You wake up to shouting, not angry shouting, not yet, but passionate voices echoing through dusty lecture halls, town meetings, church basements, and newspaper columns. You rub your eyes. This part of the journey? It's not led by generals or congressmen. Tonight, you're riding shotgun with troublemakers, firebrands, and prophets. Welcome to the era of abolitionists, and their words are sharper than any sword. You step into a New England church, wooden pews creaking under the weight of growing unrest. At the front stands William Lloyd Garrison, scrawny but fierce, waving his arms like he's conducting a storm. He's reading from the Liberator, his abolitionist newspaper. His words blister: "I will be as harsh as truth, and as uncompromising as justice." You shift in your seat. He's not here to make friends. Garrison wants slavery abolished immediately, not gradually, not someday, now. And that's radical for the 1830s. Too radical, even, for some people who hate slavery. You hear murmurs in the crowd: too fast. Too dangerous. Let's just vote it away. But Garrison doesn't flinch. He's printing truths with ink that won't wash off. You follow him outside and feel the tension trailing him like a storm cloud. He's been burned in effigy. Mobbed. Threatened. One time, he was dragged through the streets of Boston by a rope around his waist. You shudder. But Garrison keeps printing. Keeps yelling. You hop the train to Rochester, New York, where a taller figure takes the pulpit, Frederick Douglass. You sit still as his voice washes over you, calm and deliberate but iron strong. A former slave turned writer, speaker, legend. You can see the scars on his hands as he gestures, speaking about liberty, justice, and the brutal contradiction of a land of the free that chains children to plows. Douglas isn't content to just tell stories, he dissects America's soul. At one speech, he asks, "What to the slave is the 4th of July?" The crowd stiffens. You do too. That holiday suddenly feels hollow when you hear it through his voice. Historians still argue whether Garrison or Douglas had the greater impact, one all fire, the other all form, but both are necessary. Together, they create a choir of dissent. And they're not alone. Meet Harriet Beecher Stowe, a soft-spoken white woman from Ohio with a spine of steel. You walk beside her through the snow as she pens Uncle Tom's Cabin, pouring out fictionalized, but painfully real, accounts of slavery. When it's published in 1852, it becomes an instant sensation. 10,000 copies sold in the first week. You peer over a shoulder as someone reads aloud in a parlor, tears slipping down their cheek. The South? Not a fan. You hear people call her a liar. A meddler. But others say her book made the war inevitable. Legend claims that when Lincoln met her, he said, "So you're the little lady who started this great war." Though historians debate whether he really said it. You smirk. Great stories always come wrapped in mystery. Outside the major cities, you sneak into safe houses and root cellars lit by lanterns. Welcome to the Underground Railroad. You duck under floorboards as whispers guide families north, always north. Harriet Tubman, all 5 feet of her, is leading people through woods, rivers, danger. She carries a pistol, not to shoot bounty hunters, though she would, but to stop frightened escapees from turning back. You'll be free, or die, she says. And she means it. You sit with her one night by a fire, and her eyes are tired but lit with something deeper than hope. She's been to the South 19 times and freed over 300 people. That's not a job, it's a crusade. And while the North grows noisier, the South gets more afraid. You ride through a southern town and hear a sermon about how slavery is divinely ordained. A plantation owner tells his dinner guests that slaves are happy and childlike. You clench your jaw. Then you meet David Walker, whose appeal to the colored citizens of the world is so fiery it's banned in the South. Slaveholders fear his pamphlet like it's a stick of dynamite. And to be fair, it sort of is. Walker calls on enslaved people to rise up. His words crackle with righteous fury. A few months later, he's dead under mysterious circumstances. Some say poison. Others say something worse. You start to see a pattern. The louder abolitionists get, the harder the backlash hits. Southern legislatures pass gag rules in Congress to forbid talking about slavery. That's right. You can't even bring it up. You lean back in disbelief. Congress, the supposed temple of free speech, is suddenly allergic to the S word. But abolitionists aren't backing down. They're hosting rallies, sending petitions, and slipping anti-slavery tracts into Southern mailboxes. You hear Southern postmasters burning them rather than deliver them. One Charleston mob raids the post office and torches piles of abolitionist pamphlets in the town square. You think you've seen censorship before? This is full-on ideological warfare. And here's something quirky. In 1840, abolitionists form their own political party, the Liberty Party. It's tiny, scrappy, and barely makes a dent in elections, but it plants a seed. You catch one of their meetings in a drafty hall, candles flickering, and sense that, even if they lose today, they're forcing the question onto the national stage. In the middle of all this, something strange happens. You stop by a tavern in Massachusetts and overhear 2 abolitionists arguing, not about whether slavery should end, but how. Should they work within the system or tear it down? Should they ally with women's rights advocates? With free black organizers? Nothing simple. Even among allies, the vision for freedom is fractured. You sip your watered-down beer and think, freedom isn't just a dream, it's a battlefield. You head west now, out to Ohio and Illinois, and meet Elijah Lovejoy, a minister-turned-abolitionist newspaper editor. His press is attacked not once, not twice, but 4 times. On the last raid, a pro-slavery mob shoots him dead. You stand at the riverbank and watch his printing press sink into the Mississippi. One more martyr. One more warning. And yet, for every Lovejoy buried, a dozen new voices rise. In church basements. In women's sewing circles. In schoolhouses where children write letters to Congress. You walk among them, marveling at how words are turning into action. But that action has limits. You notice it most when you talk to white Northerners who say, "Of course I hate slavery," then add, "But I don't want freed blacks living in my town." Ah. There it is. The gap between moral outrage and personal comfort. That invisible line. And the South sees it too. They say, "See? The North's full of hypocrites." And they're not entirely wrong. You look around and realize, even abolition has shades. Some want freedom. Others want separation. Some want equality. Others just want the problem gone, out of sight, out of mind. Still, the energy is changing. The winds are picking up. You're not in backrooms anymore. You're on podiums, in parades, at printing presses, moving among people who've decided that talking isn't enough. The moral center is shifting. Slowly. Painfully. But shifting. And in the distance, you hear boots. Marching. Not yet an army. But footsteps headed toward a line no one can uncross. You stop and look around. Abolitionists have changed the air. They force the nation to confront the contradiction at its heart. You can't say liberty anymore without someone raising an eyebrow and asking, for whom? And even if they haven't stopped slavery, they've shattered its silence. The whisper has become a roar. Your boots sink into the soft prairie mud of Kansas, and you immediately realize, this land isn't peaceful. Not anymore. It should be, a stretch of golden grasses and distant mountains, quiet creeks weaving through tall grass. But tonight, it breathes tension. You keep your head low. You're in a powder keg disguised as farmland. Welcome to Bleeding Kansas. It's the mid-1850s, and you've stepped into one of the most violent dress rehearsals for the Civil War. Kansas has just become the star of a deeply twisted reality show, Who Wants to Be a Slave State? Here's how it happened. You rewind just a little to 1854, when Senator Stephen Douglas, a man with the face of a weary walrus and the charm of a used barn salesman, pushed through the Kansas-Nebraska Act. His idea? Let the people of each territory vote on whether they want slavery. Popular sovereignty, he calls it. Sounds democratic, right? You scoff. Because you know this is less about liberty and more about dodging the real issue. The Missouri Compromise line, remember that neat little boundary from Section 2, is now tossed out the window. The rules have changed, and the chaos has just begun. You watch as settlers flood into Kansas. Not just homesteaders looking for land. These folks come armed with agendas, and in many cases, literal guns. Pro-slavery border ruffians from Missouri cross into Kansas to stuff ballot boxes and swing votes. You see them ride in on horseback, vote in a town they don't live in, and ride out again. Easy as stealing pies at a church picnic. A few days later, anti-slavery settlers from New England show up, fewer horses, more pamphlets. They come with money from the Emigrant Aid Society, determined to make Kansas a free state. They build schools, set up town councils, and plant abolitionist flags in the prairie dirt. It's less a political campaign and more a territorial turf war. You sit in on one of their elections. No one checks IDs. No one counts twice. Some towns report more votes than people. You see poll workers blinking like raccoons in lantern light, overwhelmed, threatened, bribed. The result? A pro-slavery legislature. Elected entirely by fraud. The anti-slavery settlers call foul and decide to form their own government. Yes, that's right. Now Kansas has two governments, each claiming legitimacy, neither acknowledging the other. You shake your head. This is like declaring two winners in the same boxing match and letting them both keep punching. And the punching starts soon enough. You feel it first with words. Pro-slavery newspapers print scathing editorials calling abolitionists invaders. In response, Free State newspapers mock the slavocracy. But the paper cuts don't last long. In 1856, a gang of pro-slavery men rides into the Free State town of Lawrence, guns cocked. They burn the newspaper offices. They loot homes. They destroy the hotel. You hide behind a broken wall as flames curl around the night sky. No one dies, but the message is clear: we're done talking. The Free State settlers? Not backing down. Not after that. Enter John Brown. You meet him by a campfire. His eyes blaze with intensity, and his beard looks like it's been through 3 separate storms. He doesn't speak much, but when he does, it's scripture-laced with fury. Brown isn't interested in slow reform. He believes slavery is a sin, and sinners must be punished. Just days after the sacking of Lawrence, he takes 5 pro-slavery men from their homes near Pottawatomie Creek, drags them into the woods, and kills them with broadswords. Not guns. Swords. It's shockingly brutal. You wince. Brown doesn't. He says it was God's justice. Historians still argue whether Brown was a terrorist, a prophet, or something in between. You're not sure either. But in that moment, you can see what he's doing, sending a message in blood. Kansas descends into chaos. Guerrilla raids become a daily threat. Homes are torched. Farmers are shot in their fields. You travel with both sides, hearing them talk about defending freedom, protecting families. Each side thinks the other is evil. And you? You realize the middle ground has collapsed like a rotted porch. Over 200 people die in these skirmishes. It's no longer about votes. It's war in miniature. And far away in Washington, politicians are watching, some horrified, some amused, some just pretending it's not their problem. But then the violence steps right into their office. Back in the Capitol, Senator Charles Sumner, remember him from Section 2, gives a scathing speech mocking the pro-slavery camp and a Southern senator named Andrew Butler. Sumner calls slavery a harlot, and Butler's nephew, Preston Brooks, doesn't take it well. So Brooks walks onto the Senate floor, raises a cane, and beats Sumner unconscious at his desk. You're there. The cane cracks again and again. Blood spatters on the marble. Senators shout, but no one stops it in time. Sumner doesn't return to the Senate for 3 years. And Brooks? He's sent more canes. Some engraved with "hit him again." You sit on the chamber steps, sick to your stomach. The violence from Kansas has come home. The press has a field day. Northern newspapers cry foul. Southern ones cheer. Brooks becomes a folk hero in Dixie. Sumner becomes a martyr in New England. There's no shared outrage, just more division. And through it all, President Franklin Pierce is about as effective as a butter knife in a bear fight. He condemns violence, but mostly sides with the pro-slavery legislature. You hear Free Staters call him Doughface, a Northern man with Southern sympathies. You watch abolitionists turn their backs on the White House. They're done with compromise. Still, people keep coming to Kansas. Driven not just by land, but by principle. You ride with a wagon train of Free State families from Illinois. One woman clutches a Bible and a rifle with equal intensity. We came here to build a future, she tells you, not bury our sons. You nod, hoping she won't have to do both. And amid all this madness, something subtle happens. The idea of popular sovereignty, letting each state vote on slavery, starts to fail in real time. Kansas was supposed to be the test case. Instead, it's a nightmare. The votes are fake. The violence is real. And the country is watching. You peek into classrooms in Ohio and hear school children talking about Kansas. You pass taverns in Mississippi where men toast John Brown's eventual hanging. Suddenly, this patch of prairie means everything. And if Kansas wasn't enough? The Lecompton Constitution drops like a stink bomb in 1857. It's written by the pro-slavery government in Kansas, rigged, of course, and sent to Washington for approval. But most settlers in Kansas are now anti-slavery, and they never voted on this. Even Douglas, the guy who championed popular sovereignty, refuses to support it. You catch him cursing in a back room, calling the document a fraud. President Buchanan backs it anyway. Another misstep. You watch the Democratic Party begin to splinter right in front of you. You take a moment to breathe in the Kansas wind. The fields are still beautiful. Still vast. But every fence post feels like a marker between lives lost. This wasn't supposed to be the battlefield. But it became one. And in becoming one, it showed the nation what's coming. No one can pretend anymore. Not after Kansas. The idea that slavery could be peacefully voted out of existence? That states could calmly decide their futures at the ballot box. You shake your head. That dream is bleeding out in the tall grass. You tip your hat against the courtroom sun, the marble steps of the U.S. Supreme Court gleaming like a trap set in broad daylight. You walk into the building expecting justice, or at least something that smells like it. But the air inside is heavy. You pass a bailiff who won't meet your eyes. Everyone stiff, quiet, too aware that today's ruling isn't just about one man. It's about the soul of the country. You slip into the back row. The case is Dred Scott versus Sanford, and it's 1857. The courtroom is packed. Dred Scott sits silently near his legal team, hands folded, gaze down. You can see his breath tighten with each passing moment. He's not asking for anything grand, just his freedom. He lived in free territory for years. Isn't that supposed to mean something? Apparently not. The Chief Justice, Roger B. Taney, is already reading the opinion by the time you settle in. His words come slow, deliberate. You strain to follow them, but then they land like a sledgehammer. No black man has rights which the white man is bound to respect. The room doesn't gasp, it just chills. You grip the edge of the bench. Taney's decision says Dred Scott has no right to sue in federal court, because he's not a citizen. Not now, not ever. Not even if he was free. Not even if he was born in America. Not even if he'd fought in the Revolution and bled red, white, and blue. And as if that weren't enough, Taney goes further. The ruling also declares that Congress has no authority to ban slavery in U.S. territories. Remember that Missouri Compromise line from earlier? That invisible barrier between free and slave states. Poof. Gone. Like it never existed. You sit back, stunned. What just happened wasn't just a legal defeat, it was a constitutional napalm strike. In one decision, the court has handed slavery a blank check to spread anywhere. Anywhere. The South? Ecstatic. Newspapers praise the ruling. Plantation owners light cigars and toast Taney by name. You hear the phrase settled once and for all thrown around like confetti. The North? Outraged. Furious. Terrified. You read an editorial that calls the ruling a second American Revolution in favor of tyranny. And Dred Scott? He walks away still enslaved. Though he'll be freed eventually by the family that owns him, you can't help but notice the irony. He gains his freedom not from the system, but in spite of it. You linger in Washington and watch how the ruling splits even moderate politicians. Some argue it must be accepted as the law of the land. Others refuse. A young, wiry lawyer from Illinois is especially vocal. He's not president yet, but his name is on everyone's lips, Abraham Lincoln. You walk with him down a quiet street one evening. He's mulling over the court's words, a deep crease between his brows. If the government can deny a black man's citizenship today, he mutters, what might it deny someone else tomorrow? It's not just a legal ruling. It's a philosophical earthquake. You head west again, passing through towns where the ruling is scrawled in angry chalk on walls and protest signs. You attend an abolitionist rally in New York. The speaker's voice cracks as he says, "We have no law anymore. Only power." The crowd murmurs. Some cheer. Some weep. You stop at a tavern in Ohio where people are reading the decision aloud over pints. One man slams his drink on the table. So we fought a revolution for this? For tyranny in velvet robes. And here's a weird detail that gets lost in most textbooks. Chief Justice Taney thought this ruling would calm the nation down. Seriously. He believed that if the court made a strong decision, clearly backing slavery, it would settle the matter once and for all. Historians still argue whether he was that naive or just politically tone-deaf. Either way, the opposite happens. The ruling doesn't close the wound. It infects it. You walk back through Missouri, the very place where Scott's case began. Tensions are boiling. Anti-slavery settlers whisper about defiance. Slave catchers are more aggressive. You hear of free black citizens being kidnapped in broad daylight, then dragged south in chains. And now that slavery is technically allowed everywhere, you begin to understand the fear rising in the North. What if the entire country becomes a slave nation by law? People start to talk in code. Secret meetings. Underground resistance ramps up. And abolitionists grow bolder. Even some who once urged patience now demand direct action. Meanwhile, the political fallout is immediate. You watch the Democratic Party, once a national powerhouse, begin to fracture like a cracked teacup. Northern Democrats can't defend the ruling without losing voters. Southern Democrats demand full compliance. And out of the rubble, something new rises, the Republican Party. A strange coalition of ex-Whigs, anti-slavery Democrats, free soilers, and abolitionists. Their unifying principle? No slavery in the territories. Simple, clear, dangerous. You attend one of their early rallies in Illinois. Flags wave. Brass bands play. And standing tall on the makeshift stage is, you guessed it, Abraham Lincoln. He's not yelling. His voice is calm. Measured. But when he says, "A house divided against itself cannot stand," the crowd stills. You can hear the wind shift. Lincoln argues that the country can't endure half slave and half free. It has to become one or the other. You watch the crowd, some nodding, others squirming. Because that sentence isn't a speech line. It's a threat. And a prophecy. You glance at the Southern newspapers. They're already calling Lincoln dangerous. Radical. Some even accuse him of being secretly black. Others say he's a puppet of Northern elites. You shake your head. The room is darkening, and the temperature is dropping. And then, you hear whispers of armed militias forming again. Not in Kansas this time, but in southern towns preparing just in case. States' rights groups hold rallies, brandishing rifles and state flags. You hear a preacher in Georgia say, "If they try to take away our way of life, let the Union perish." You sit in silence as that phrase echoes. Let the Union perish. And Dred Scott? His name is still on every tongue. A man who never asked to be famous becomes the symbol of everything broken. You walk past a protest sign, "I am Dred Scott." The name becomes a cry. A warning. A banner under which the country marches, toward what, no one can quite say. But you know. You felt it in Kansas. You heard it in Congress. You see it now in every pair of narrowed eyes across the Mason-Dixon line. The center is cracking. And the Supreme Court, meant to be a quiet place of reason, just threw a stick of dynamite into the fireplace. You climb the marble steps one last time. The courtroom's empty now. Taney's bench is cold. But the echo of his words still hangs in the air. No rights which the white man is bound to respect. You shiver. Because after that sentence, everything becomes possible. You step onto a platform slick with soot, the steam from a chugging locomotive rising like a genie from a bottle. Your ears ring with the hiss of iron brakes, and your boots rattle against freshly laid rails. This isn't farmland anymore. This is progress, loud, metallic, and moving at a speed no one's fully ready for. The train bell clangs. You're riding the veins of a country split by more than just ideals. Welcome to the age of rails, telegraphs, and runaway profits. It's the 1850s, and while the North and South debate morality, a new power quietly hums beneath their feet: industry. You hop onto a freight train loaded with pig iron and textiles headed east, and the conductor's already barking at delays. Because time, suddenly, is money. You glance at a map. The North is webbed with railroads, their steel arms stretching from Chicago to Boston to Baltimore. Towns that once took weeks to reach can now be visited by dinner. The South? Sparse rails, mostly to carry cotton to ports. Their rail system is less a network and more a straight line from plantation to shipping dock. You feel the imbalance in your bones. In this new America, distance is dying. The telegraph kills it first. You step into a telegraph office, where young men in green visors hammer out Morse code like it's music. Dots and dashes race across the wires, sending news, orders, and gossip at lightning speed. You stand back and realize, for the first time in human history, people don't need to move to send power. They just need to tap. And who owns the tapping fingers? Mostly the North. The North builds the wires. The North funds the companies. The North lays the tracks. And the South, steeped in tradition and enslaved labor, watches warily as the gears of industry grind forward without them. You tour a textile mill in Massachusetts, and the noise is deafening. Spindles spinning, belts whipping. Mostly women and children work here, their hands raw, eyes tired. You think this looks a lot like slavery, but with wages. You're not wrong. Northern industry isn't innocent. But it's fast, it's urbanizing, and it's creating a new kind of wealth. One that doesn't need cotton fields. And that terrifies the South. Because as the North surges ahead with factories, shipyards, banking, and rail, the South is stuck in a loop: cotton, cotton, cotton. And cotton needs land. And cotton needs labor. Enslaved labor. You lean against a wooden post outside a southern bank. A plantation owner walks by, tipping his hat to a clerk. You glance at his account book. It's not just cotton sales, it's loans taken out with enslaved people as collateral. That's right. People as property, recorded on paper, leveraged like cows or corn. By the 1850s, the total value of enslaved human beings in the South is more than all the banks, railroads, and factories in the US combined. You run your finger down the page and feel sick. But there it is, economics, tangled in chains. And while the South is getting rich, very rich, it's getting rich in a rigid way. Planters don't diversify. They don't invest in factories or shipyards. They pour everything into cotton. One crop. One system. One bet. And here's the kicker, that bet only works as long as the global market plays along. You sit beside a dock in New Orleans and watch British ships load up cotton bales like they're hauling treasure. Because to England, they are. The textile mills in Manchester run on Southern cotton. You hear Southern senators boast, cotton is king. They say if war ever comes, England and France won't dare side with the North. They need our cotton too much. Historians still argue whether this overconfidence would doom them later. But standing here, watching the ships sail, you can see how the delusion sets in. The South sees itself as the economic engine of the world. And in some ways, it is. But the engine runs on firewood and bodies, while the North runs on steam and steel. You walk into a New York City bank and compare ledgers. The North is financializing. Railroads, telegraphs, insurance, even early factories are becoming investments. Capitalism 2.0 is being written up here. But the South? Still stuck on a monocrop. A very profitable monocrop, yes, but one vulnerable to revolt, drought, tariffs, war. And then there's immigration. You stroll through a port in Boston, watching ships spill out families from Ireland, Germany, Italy. They come poor, desperate, and ready to work. Northern cities balloon. You visit Chicago and find Irish men laying rail at breakneck speed, Poles working in meat-packing plants, Germans opening bakeries. The South? Not so much. Fewer immigrants go there. Why? Jobs are filled by enslaved people. You feel the long-term danger. Immigrants become voters, workers, citizens. They build infrastructure, they organize, they add to the political weight of the North. Meanwhile, the South stays insular, aristocratic, stubborn. You walk the streets of Philadelphia and see the future being poured from molten steel. You walk through Savannah and see the past being whipped across cotton fields. Two economies. Two futures. One flag, barely. Now, a quirky tidbit for you, in the 1850s, Americans are obsessed with railroad metaphors. Newspapers call Progress steam engine of liberty. Politicians say the country must stay on track. Poets write odes to locomotives. Everyone sees the train as the symbol of the age. Fast, loud, impossible to stop. But here's the twist, it's not just literal. The train is also a metaphor for what's coming. Once it starts rolling, no one knows how to slow it down. You sit beside a telegraph pole on a Virginia hillside. The wire above you vibrates. Somewhere, someone is sending news of a broken compromise or a political betrayal. You imagine the message crossing rivers and states in seconds. Technology has shrunk the country, even as politics tear it apart. And here's the contradiction, the closer the country gets through rails and wires, the more divided it becomes. You feel that irony deep in your chest. Progress doesn't always mean unity. You pass a printing press in Baltimore. The publisher's wearing an apron, ink smudged on his sleeves. He tells you how much faster he can spread ideas now. You glance down at the pages, abolitionist manifestos, economic reports, angry columns, satirical cartoons. Every side has a voice, and now those voices move faster than ever. You whisper to yourself, speed is not peace. You end your day in a Washington hotel lobby. The fireplace crackles. Senators argue by lamplight about tariffs and trade, about the economic future of America. One Southern man slams his glass down. We won't be turned into another New England. Another replies, then stop pretending cotton is a god. You walk away before the fight turns physical. You've seen enough. Rails run like arteries. Telegraph wires like nerves. Steam engines scream into the night. But under it all, the country's heart is pounding too fast, too loud, too dangerously. The North has speed. The South has power. But neither can control the rhythm anymore. And the train? It's coming around the bend. You can hear it. The moon is high, casting silver blades across the darkened hills of western Virginia. You crouch behind a low stone wall, breath shallow, your hands trembling around a borrowed musket. A lone figure walks ahead of you, or bearded, silent, moving like a shadow stitched to the earth. That's John Brown, and tonight, you're following him into the lion's den. You're in Harper's Ferry, 1859. This sleepy town lies at the confluence of the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers, nestled like a forgotten marble in the valley between three states. But it's also home to a federal arsenal, filled with weapons, and that makes it the perfect target for a plan that, depending on who you ask, is either divine justice or pure lunacy. John Brown doesn't whisper. He declares. He says slavery is America's original sin, and he's here to scrub it out with fire and steel. You remember what he did back in bleeding Kansas, swords, ambushes, 5 dead men. Now, he's aiming higher. Much higher. The plan? Seize the arsenal. Arm enslaved people across the South. Spark a mass uprising that'll rip slavery out by the roots. Bold? Yes. Blood-soaked? Almost certainly. Suicidal? You think that too, but Brown doesn't care. He tells his followers, I'm worth now infinitely more to die than to live. You look around. He's got 21 men. That's it. A few black allies, including Dangerfield Newby, an escaped enslaved man whose wife and children are still in bondage. Some of the others are Brown's own sons. No generals. No cavalry. Just grit, guns, and scripture. You slip into the army under cover of night. No resistance, at first. The watchmen are overpowered. The gates are locked. Weapons in hand. Brown sends word to nearby enslaved people to rise up. But the response is confused. Or absent. You wait in the shadows, expecting dozens, hundreds, to come. They don't. Or can't. By morning, the town is in chaos. A train is stopped, then, awkwardly, allowed to leave. It carries the news to Washington, D.C., faster than a horse could have ever galloped. Within hours, militia swarm the hills. Brown's men hole up in a fire engine house. You're inside with them, heart hammering. Windows shatter with gunfire. One of Brown's sons is hit. He groans and bleeds out in a corner. Another begs his father to shoot him and end the pain. Brown refuses. You taste bile in your throat. And then, boots outside. A voice booms. Colonel Robert E. Lee is here. That's right. That Lee. Not a Confederate general yet, just a respected officer in the U.S. Army, dispatched to end this siege quickly and cleanly. Beside him? J.B. Stuart, young, cocky, future Confederate cavalry star. The irony is thick enough to chew. They demand surrender. Brown refuses. At dawn, the Marines storm the engine house. The door splinters. You dive for cover. Gunfire rips through the air like metal bees. 2 of Brown's men are instantly killed. A Marine runs Brown through with a saber, not fatally, but deep. Blood pours from his ribs. He collapses. It's over in minutes. You stand there, blinking in the smoky air. 11 of Brown's followers are dead. 5 escape, at least for now. Brown is dragged out, bloody but alive. The townspeople gather around him like he's a captured myth. And through cracked lips, he speaks. Not screams. Not curses. But scripture. Calm, poetic scripture. The trial is swift. You sit in the gallery as Brown, barely able to stand, is charged with treason, inciting a slave insurrection, and murder. He defends himself with chilling clarity. No lawyer. No bluster. Just conviction. He says, I believe that to have interfered as I have done, in behalf of his despised poor, was not wrong, but right. You feel the courtroom lean in. Even those who hate him can't look away. He's sentenced to hang. You visit his cell the night before the execution. He's writing letters, calmly. One to his wife. One to Frederick Douglass, whom he had tried to recruit. Douglass said no, thinking it was madness. Another to the American people. He believes his death will awaken the North. I am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood. On December 2, 1859, you stand in a silent field, surrounded by soldiers and citizens. Brown is led to the gallows. His beard flutters in the wind. He kisses a child's forehead on the way. Someone asks if he regrets anything. He says no. The trapdoor falls. His body drops. And the nation holds its breath. But Brown doesn't die in that moment. Not really. In the North, he becomes a martyr. Bells toll. Churches hold vigils. Ralph Waldo Emerson says Brown's hanging will make the gallows as glorious as the cross. You attend a service where school children recite his last words. It feels like canonization. In the South, he becomes a monster. A terrorist. Proof that the North wants to unleash blood and rebellion on their homes. You hear governors whisper about tightening patrols, arming towns, seceding, if necessary. And here's a strange little footnote, one of the Marines who helped capture Brown? A young lieutenant named John Wilkes Booth. Yes, that Booth. He stands among the crowd at the hanging. Sees it all. Maybe remembers it. You wonder what he felt that day. Admiration? Hatred? Destiny? Historians still argue whether Brown hastened the war or simply exposed its inevitability. Was he a spark or just the flame that illuminated the room? You walk through towns that can't agree. In Boston, they're singing John Brown's Body, a marching tune turned funeral hymn turned war anthem. In Charleston, they're stockpiling weapons. You see how the myth of Brown is already dividing the country more than the man ever could. He was just a man. But now, he's a symbol. And symbols are dangerous. You stop in front of a mural decades later, long after the war. It shows Brown standing tall, arms outstretched like Moses, breaking chains. Below it, someone's graffitied a question, but at what cost? And you whisper, maybe to yourself, whatever it was, we're still paying it. The ballots are being counted under flickering gaslight. You sit on the edge of a table, boots dripping from a cold November rain, as men in long coats pull paper after paper from wooden boxes. No one speaking much, but their silence says plenty. This isn't just an election, it's a test of whether the country still wants to be a country. The year is 1860, and you're smack in the middle of the most pivotal presidential race the United States has ever seen. Spoiler alert, no matter who wins, the country loses. Let's lay out the playing field. You peer down at a campaign poster. For faces stare back at you. For men, for platforms, for completely different visions of America. Abraham Lincoln, representing the new Republican Party. Tall, lean, and relatively unknown outside of Illinois. His message? No expansion of slavery into the territories, but he's not calling for immediate abolition where it already exists. Still, to the south, Lincoln might as well be John Brown in a top hat. Stephen A. Douglas, the Northern Democrat. You've met him before, champion of popular sovereignty. Let the people vote, let the territories decide. He's still trying to thread the needle, but that thread is fraying fast. John C. R. Breckinridge, the Southern Democrat and current vice president. He wants slavery protected everywhere, including the territories. His platform is crystal clear: keep the system intact, or the South walks. John Bell, of the Constitutional Union Party. His entire campaign strategy? Please don't talk about slavery. Seriously. His slogan might as well be, can't we all just get along? You chuckle bitterly. Because no, they can't. You travel through the North in the weeks leading up to the election. Lincoln's rallies are packed. You see farmers, factory workers, immigrants, people who don't necessarily love each other, but they all agree on one thing: the slave power is out of control. They've read the Dred Scott decision. They've seen Kansas burn. They want a leader who'll stop slavery's spread, not shake its hand. In the South? The mere mention of Lincoln sends people into fits. You attend a town hall in Georgia where a man in a frayed suit declares, if that black Republican wins, we leave. Mark my words. The room erupts in cheers. You look around. They're not bluffing. They mean it. And here's where things get dicey. Lincoln doesn't even appear on the ballot in 10 southern states. That's right, you walk into polling places across the deep South and his name isn't there. Democracy's wearing a fake mustache and sunglasses. It's pretending not to be itself. Election day comes, and the nation holds its breath. You sit in a candlelit kitchen in Pennsylvania as results trickle in by telegraph. Tension thick as cold syrup. The states start stacking up. Lincoln wins every free state except New Jersey. Breckinridge sweeps the deep South. Douglas grabs a few border areas. Bell carries bits of Tennessee, Kentucky, and Virginia. And then the final tally rolls in: Abraham Lincoln wins. Not just squeaks by, he wins outright, with a solid electoral majority. But here's the catch: he gets less than 40% of the popular vote. In other words, 60% of the country voted against him. You feel the silence hit like thunder. There's no celebration in the South. No cautious optimism. Just shock. Panic. Rage. You're in Charleston the next morning. A newspaper boy shouts, "Lincoln wins," and is promptly chased down the street. Shopkeepers whisper behind closed doors. You pass a group of men melting down pewter into bullets. One of them looks up and mutters, "It's begun." And it has. You remember what politicians said months earlier, "Elect Lincoln, and we secede." You thought it was bluster. It's not. In the North, Lincoln stays quiet. He hasn't even taken office yet, won't until March of 1861. But already, the Union is unraveling like a poorly sewn quilt. You hear the seams rip. South Carolina moves first. Bold, loud, dramatic, as always. You watch as their legislature meets in a frenzy of speeches and slaps on the back. One lawmaker calls the Union a suicide pact. Another says, "We are not slaves to a majority." They vote unanimously to secede. And the moment they do, something electric charges the South. You travel through Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, one by one, they follow. Each one says they're just protecting their rights. But let's be honest, you've read the declarations of secession. They say the quiet part out loud, it's about slavery. Not tariffs. Not railroads. Not states' rights in some abstract sense. Slavery. The cornerstone of their economy, society, and identity. They don't want a president, even one who promises not to touch slavery where it exists, who questions its expansion. And here's a quirky, frustrating twist: Lincoln hasn't even done anything yet. He's still in Springfield, Illinois, packing his bags, probably wondering where to find a decent suit for his inaugural address. Historians still argue whether the South was just looking for an excuse. Was Lincoln the trigger, or just the final straw? You lean toward the latter. The tension had been building like a bad song, Lincoln just hit the last note. You travel to Washington, where President James Buchanan still technically runs the country. You hope he'll do something. Anything. But he doesn't. He says secession is illegal, but also says the federal government has no power to stop it. You rub your temples. That's like saying burglary is wrong but shrugging when someone steals your house. Congress is paralyzed. Southern representatives begin resigning. You attend a farewell speech in the House chamber. One congressman actually weeps. Another shouts about tyranny. A third walks out mid-session, slamming the door behind him. You stare at the empty seats left behind. And here's another unsettling detail: the military is scattered, and Southern sympathizers still hold many key posts. You peek at supply logs. Forts are underdefended. Arsenals vulnerable. You feel the clock ticking. As Lincoln prepares for his journey to D.C., rumors swirl of assassination plots. You ride the same train route with him. In Baltimore, he's smuggled through at night in disguise. A lanky man in a floppy hat, hiding in a sleeping car like a hunted outlaw. He hasn't even taken the oath yet, and already, people want him dead. You reach the end of the year with more questions than answers. Will Lincoln use force? Will the North go along with war? Is there still room for compromise? But deep down, you know. The election didn't settle anything. It just clarified what was already true. The United States isn't united. Not politically. Not economically. Not morally. And Lincoln? He didn't light the fire. He just walked into the house already ablaze. You walk the cobbled streets of Charleston, South Carolina, boots crunching over broken oyster shells and bits of palmetto leaves. It's a December morning in 1860, and the air feels strangely clean, too clean, like the sky doesn't yet know what's happened. You stop outside St. Andrew's Hall and hear the cheers bursting from inside. Men are slapping backs, waving papers, weeping with joy. The cause? South Carolina has just seceded from the Union. You watch one delegate hoist a handmade banner that reads, "Our destiny is our own." Another man quotes Jefferson as though it were scripture, his voice trembling. But what they don't quote, not now, not loudly, is the real fuel behind this destiny. Because you've seen the declaration of immediate causes they publish hours later, the document explaining why South Carolina has chosen this path. It's not vague. It's not subtle. It says, flat out, the North is hostile to slavery. It says the federal government no longer protects their right to own people. You don't need to read between the lines. The lines are shouting. You step outside and see the flag of South Carolina fluttering over a government building, no stars and stripes in sight. Just palmetto and crescent, like a brand new nation has hatched overnight. The news spreads fast. In the following weeks, you crisscross the Deep South by train, stagecoach, and foot. Mississippi joins the breakaway. Then Florida, Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana. By early February 1861, Texas signs on too, with former Governor Sam Houston warning them not to. They ignore him. They want their sovereignty. You hear one delegate say, "We are not revolutionaries. We are reclaiming what was ours." It sounds nice on paper. But in practice? It's rebellion with velvet drapes. In Montgomery, Alabama, you find yourself inside a sweltering hall filled with suited men drawing up a new constitution for their freshly named country, the Confederate States of America. It looks a lot like the old U.S. Constitution until you squint and notice the lines that explicitly protect slavery. Not just allow it. Enshrine it. They call it the cornerstone. A lawyer from Georgia, Alexander Stephens, gets up to speak. His vice president now, and his speech, the infamous cornerstone speech, goes down like iron. You sit near the back, listening to his words. Our new government is founded upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery is his natural and normal condition. You shift in your seat. That's not a states' rights argument. That's a confession. Stephens isn't dodging anymore. No code words, no euphemisms. The cornerstone of the Confederacy is white supremacy. You look around. No one flinches. You wander the streets of Montgomery that night. People celebrate like it's the 4th of July, fireworks, toasts, parades. A brass band plays patriotic songs. You pause, trying to remember which country they're celebrating. And while the Confederacy forms its skeleton, the North is still leaderless. Remember, Lincoln doesn't take office until March. So it's still James Buchanan in the White House, and if leadership were firewood, Buchanan couldn't kindle a match with a flamethrower. You attend a cabinet meeting, tense, confused, full of men who don't agree on anything. Should they negotiate? Should they send troops? Buchanan's answer? Let the next guy handle it. You want to scream. Meanwhile, Southern militias start seizing federal property. You travel to Florida and watch as Fort Marion is taken without a shot. In Louisiana, you see cannons dragged from U.S. arsenals and repainted with Confederate seals. Over 30 federal sites are taken. No national response. But there's one site they can't touch, Fort Sumter, in Charleston Harbor. You hop a rowboat to get there. It's not much, just a brick fortress on a man-made island, still under Union control. Inside? Major Robert Anderson and a handful of loyal troops, surrounded by water, staring at a southern city that now views them as enemies. Tensions ratchet. Charleston demands surrender. Anderson refuses. You watch Confederate militia set up artillery on the shoreline, pointing straight at the fort. It feels like everyone's daring someone else to blink. And while the guns stay silent, for now, you start to realize something important. South Carolina's secession wasn't just symbolic. It was contagious. Because this isn't one state. It's now 7, each with their own secession convention, each creating new flags, printing new currency, forming new militias. You walk through a market in Alabama and buy a Confederate dollar, new ink, same problems. And the people? They're into it. You see women sewing uniforms, children marching with wooden rifles, editors publishing editorials with titles like To Arms, Dixie. Secession becomes a social movement, trendy, proud, deadly. Of course, not everyone cheers. You find quiet unionists in the South, shopkeepers, farmers, ministers, worried about what's coming. One man in Georgia whispers to you, "This won't end in a negotiation. It'll end in smoke." He's not wrong. And in the North? People are still in shock. Lincoln's election wasn't a call to war, or it was a ballot. But the South read it as an ultimatum. You attend meetings in Philadelphia, Boston, and New York. Some folks say, let them go. They argue the Union should cut the South loose. They'll come crawling back when they realize they can't survive alone. Others aren't so sure. They warn that letting the Confederacy go means legitimizing treason. You walk past a mural of George Washington, paint chipping on the frame. And for the first time, the idea of the United States doesn't feel so secure. Not like it used to. You returned to Charleston one last time that winter. The town is jittery, waiting for something to happen at Fort Sumter. One man compares it to sitting on a powder keg while the fuse burns slowly. You see his fingers twitch as he lights his pipe. And overhead, fluttering on every courthouse and shop awning, are the new colors, stars arranged in a circle. The flag of the Confederacy. You pause. You didn't expect it to look so ordinary. But that's the danger, isn't it? Sometimes, the greatest threats to a country don't come with fangs and fire. They come dressed like neighbors. Wearing familiar flags. Speaking familiar words, freedom, rights, heritage. But twisting them, warping them, using them to justify an unjust cause. The door to the Union has just slammed shut for millions. And you're standing in the hallway, staring at the cracks in the hinges. You're standing on the edge of Mississippi in early 1861, wind tugging at your coat, and suddenly the map you once knew feels like it's peeling itself apart. State by state, like dominoes in slow motion, the South is walking out the door. Secession is spreading like a fever. Remember how South Carolina kicked things off? Well, her sisters have taken the cue. You watch Mississippi secede on January 9th. A week later, Florida, then Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. All within 6 weeks. It's like watching a row of matchsticks catch, one flame igniting the next. Each state drafts a declaration, each one citing slavery, some subtly, some with blunt force. And still, Lincoln hasn't even been inaugurated yet. You're on a riverboat heading toward Baton Rouge, and you overhear passengers talking like the Union's already ancient history. They say, "We're not rebels. We're defenders of liberty." You look out across the swamp and wonder how liberty keeps getting defined by who gets to hold the whip. The seceding states don't just walk out quietly. They start building. Drafting constitutions. Forming armies. Raising taxes. Opening armories. Printing stamps and money. You pick up a Confederate $5 bill. It looks official, but the ink is still wet. By February 4, 1861, delegates from the seceded states meet in Montgomery, Alabama, to form their own government. You slip inside the hall, where ceiling fans stir hot air above rows of suits and beards. They hammer out the Constitution of the Confederate States of America in a matter of days. It looks eerily familiar, almost a copy of the U.S. Constitution. Except with a few key changes. Like what? Well, for starters, slavery isn't implied, it's explicitly protected. States get more autonomy, but not on that issue. You can't even pass a law to limit slavery in your state if you wanted to. And the president? 6-year term, no re-election. The founding fathers might have raised a brow. But here's the twist. The Confederacy isn't some ragtag rebellion. It's full of wealthy landowners, seasoned politicians, and graduates of West Point. You listen to them speak. They believe this is the true American vision, the one they say the North betrayed. One Mississippi editor writes, "We are the real heirs of the Revolution." You roll your eyes. On February 9, 1861, they elect Jefferson Davis as president. You watch him take the stage, stoic, reluctant, always looking like he smells something sour. A veteran, former senator, Secretary of War under Pierce. Not a firebrand like some of his peers, but serious, respected. You hear him say, "All we ask is to be let alone." But you know that's not quite true. You head west to Texas, where secession feels rowdier. They hold a public vote. Campaign signs are tacked to trees. Barroom debates break out. One group says, "We must stand with our Southern brothers." Another says, "We joined the Union voluntarily, and we can leave voluntarily." But Sam Houston, the governor, yes, the hero of San Jacinto, isn't buying it. You watch him pace back and forth at a town meeting, beard bristling. "I love Texas," he says, "but I love the Union more." He refuses to swear loyalty to the Confederacy. They boot him from office. He walks away, head high, heart broken. Everywhere you go now, new flags go up. New allegiances form. Even militias take on new names. You stand in front of a courthouse in Georgia and hear a captain barking at teenage boys, "The South is now a nation, boys. Let's defend her." And the Upper South? Still undecided. You ride into Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas, all watching nervously from the sidelines. They haven't seceded yet. They're hesitant. More industrial, more divided. They're hoping maybe, just maybe, this can still be solved without war. You feel the ground tremble beneath your boots. Because while the South mobilizes, the North is frozen. Lincoln is still waiting in Springfield, scribbling drafts of his inaugural speech. The federal government is like an old mule, confused, stiff, and not sure which direction to run. You return to Washington, D.C. It's February, and the Capitol feels brittle, like a city made of eggshells. Federal troops guard the streets. Rumors of a Southern invasion swirl daily. Some whisper that Lincoln will be assassinated before he can even take office. It sounds dramatic until you see the precautions. Lincoln's train to Washington doesn't enter the city by fanfare, but under cloak and shadow, arriving in the middle of the night, rerouted secretly through Baltimore. You're on board, hiding in the same car, listening to the muffled clack of the rails. He's not even president yet, and already, he's a hunted man. And here's a quirky little wrinkle: Maryland, the state surrounding the capital, is full of Southern sympathizers. You pass through towns where Union flags are ripped down overnight. You hear shopkeepers grumble that they might just join the Confederacy too. D.C. is basically an island surrounded by suspicion. You take a moment and walk the corridors of the Capitol building, still under construction. Workers hammer marble columns while senators argue just yards away. It feels surreal, like building a second floor while the first is on fire. You can't help but wonder, why no military response yet? Why doesn't the Union strike back while the Confederacy is still organizing? Because here's the uncomfortable truth: no one wants to fire first. The South hopes the North won't resist. That Lincoln will be passive. That they can form a country without war. The North hopes secession is just a bluff. That cooler heads will prevail. But this is still fixable. You stand on the edge of the Potomac River and stare south. You see smoke from campfires in Virginia. You hear cannons being tested in Tennessee. You smell something rising that isn't just wood smoke. It's fear. And amid all this, the Constitution is silent. It never says whether a state can leave the Union. It doesn't lay out steps for unbreaking a country. Everyone's guessing. Everyone's improvising. Historians still argue whether Lincoln could have stopped the slide. Some say he should have negotiated. Others say negotiation would have only delayed the bloodshed. But from where you're standing, the choice wasn't Lincoln's alone. The South left the table and took the chairs with them. Secession has become self-sustaining. It feeds on fear, honor, vengeance, pride. Each state that leaves makes it easier for the next. Each flag raised makes return less likely. And now, only one question remains. Will war come slowly, like erosion? Or will it come all at once, like lightning? Either way, you can feel the storm building behind you. You're standing just outside Springfield, Illinois, on a raw March morning, and the man you've been waiting for steps through the door of a modest home, tall and spare like a tree stripped of leaves. Abraham Lincoln adjusts his collar, gives a shy wave to the crowd, and begins his journey to Washington, D.C., to become president of a country that's already halfway out the door. He's not smiling much. You travel with him, by train, on what becomes a kind of rolling wake and awkward parade. Every town he stops in wants to cheer, but their applause feels thin, anxious. Mothers clutch their sons. Merchants wave little flags. But underneath the bunting and brass bands, everyone's asking the same question: what now? Lincoln gives speeches at each stop, but they're not barn burners. They're cautious, restrained, always circling the same idea: we must not be enemies. You hear him repeat it in Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York. His words are chosen like glassware, carefully, delicately, so nothing breaks. But you can feel the strain in his voice. Finally, on March 4, 1861, you squeeze onto the Capitol grounds and wait, shoulder to shoulder with thousands. Cannon stand by. Troops line the rooftops. It feels less like a ceremony and more like a standoff. Washington is still part construction site, part fortress. Lincoln rises. The new president begins to speak. His inaugural address is quiet, legalistic, but underneath, it simmers with tension. He says he won't interfere with slavery where it already exists. That he has no lawful right to do so. He says secession is illegal, but that he won't start a war unless the South fires first. Then he ends on a note that stings. The mystic chords of memory will yet swell, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. You hear the wind shift. It's poetic. It's hopeful. But is it enough? You lean against a column and look out across the crowd. Some nod. Some scoff. One man mutters, "Too late for angels." And now Lincoln is president. He walks into the White House with a nation disintegrating under his feet. 7 states are gone. Forts and arsenals have been seized. And still, no gunfire. Not yet. But pressure builds. You visit Lincoln's first cabinet meetings. It's a room full of tension in waistcoats. He's picked a team of rivals, each man representing a different faction or former party. Secretary of State William Seward thinks the Union should provoke a foreign crisis to reunite the country. Lincoln listens, then politely moves on. The real flashpoint is looming in Charleston Harbor, Fort Sumter. You take a steamship to the South Carolina coast. Fort Sumter sits squat and brick red in the middle of the water, stubbornly flying the U.S. flag, even though everything around it now claims to be Confederate. Inside is Major Robert Anderson, still holding on with limited supplies. The Confederates, now under the authority of Jefferson Davis, are demanding surrender. Anderson refuses. You walk the harbor and watch Confederate artillerymen positioning their guns. Charleston's elite gather on balconies with opera glasses, whispering that the whole thing's a bluff. They've been saying that for weeks. Back in Washington, Lincoln debates whether to resupply the fort. He knows if he sends ships, the South might see it as an act of war. But if he doesn't, the fort will fall without a fight. So he plays chess. On April 6, he tells South Carolina that a ship is coming, but only with food, not weapons. Jefferson Davis doesn't care. To him, a ship is a ship. He gives the order. And on April 12, 1861, at 4:30 a.m., you stand on the Charleston Battery and feel the sky crack open. Boom! A single mortar shell arcs through the dark and lands on Fort Sumter. Then another. And another. Confederate batteries unleash over 4,000 shells in 34 hours. You watch fire pour from the fort's parapets. You smell salt, smoke, gunpowder. Charleston citizens cheer from rooftops like they're at a picnic. One man opens champagne. A young woman sketches the bombardment in a notebook. Inside the fort, Anderson's men return fire, but they're outgunned and outmanned. No one dies, but the message is clear. This is war. You stand beside Anderson as he lowers the US flag and evacuates. His men march out with dignity, band playing. And though they're allowed to leave with honors, the symbolism is searing. The Union's been shot at, and it backed down. Back in Washington, Lincoln's jaw tightens. On April 15, he issues a call for 75,000 volunteers to put down the rebellion. He says the Union must be preserved. The line is drawn. And now, everything changes. Because while the Deep South had already seceded, the Upper South was still waiting. Still undecided. Still hoping this wouldn't come to war. But now that Lincoln's called for troops, those states have to choose a side. Virginia moves first. You stand in Richmond as their legislature debates the crisis. When the news hits that Lincoln is calling up militias, including Virginian troops, to fight southern states, the room goes quiet. Then rage. Then resolve. On April 17, Virginia secedes. Within weeks, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas follow. And suddenly, the Confederacy isn't just 7 states, it's 11. You look at a map. The line is drawn now, solid and sharp. Border states teeter like plates on a rail. You hear Lincoln whisper to an aide, "We are in great peril." And yet, something clicks. Because now the Union isn't just bleeding slowly. Now it's been punched in the face. Public opinion in the North swings overnight. You attend a rally in Boston where men cheer and shout, "To arms!" Banners unfurl. Towns begin holding recruitment fairs. Factory whistles signal military shifts. You see boys lining up with knapsacks, smiling, still unaware that some of them won't come home. You wander into a newly formed camp in Ohio. It smells of canvas and sweat. A farmer from Indiana sharpens his bayonet. A school teacher from Vermont teaches others how to load their rifles. You see a black man trying to enlist and being turned away. Not yet, they say. Even now, the Union isn't ready to see all its citizens as soldiers. But the gears are turning. The train is moving. You hear Lincoln say to his cabinet, "The war will be long and hard. But the Union must stand." And as you walk past the Capitol dome, still under construction, you realize it might not just be a country that's being rebuilt. It might be everything. You wipe the sea spray from your face as the rowboat pitches and bobs in the choppy waters of Charleston Harbor. The air smells like salt, gunpowder, and a tension too thick to name. You drift past the battered silhouette of Fort Sumter, now a symbol carved in smoke. Inside, Union soldiers pack up, salute their flag, and depart, not in surrender, but in something worse, evacuation. The war has begun, and the first cannon has already spoken. But let's rewind just a touch, not to the boom, but to the siege. Because while the Battle of Fort Sumter gets the headlines, the silent standoff before it was just as important. You were there. You saw Major Robert Anderson, commander of the fort, holding out for months with dwindling supplies and a shrinking hope that reason might prevail. The siege began as a staring contest. Confederate forces, led by General P.G.T. Beauregard, had surrounded the fort since January 1861, cutting off supply lines and taunting Anderson's men with drills and cannon placements. It was like watching someone build a noose around a man who refused to flinch. But Anderson knew something you knew too: if the Union gave up Fort Sumter without a fight, it might as well give up the entire South. That's why, in early April, when Lincoln finally decided to send a resupply ship, it wasn't just about food. It was a statement. We're not abandoning this country without a fight. Beauregard wasn't about to wait. He sent envoys to the fort, surrender or be shelled. Anderson stalled. Negotiated. Sent polite replies. But he wouldn't back down. Then came the first shot, not at the fort, but at the sky. At 4:30 a.m. on April 12, the Confederates launched a single, arcing mortar shell that exploded above Fort Sumter, signaling the beginning of the bombardment. You feel the night tear open with that blast. Windows in Charleston rattle. Church bells toll. It's no longer just about honor or rights or balance. It's war now, no turning back. For 34 straight hours, Confederate guns rain iron and fire on the fort. You crouch inside with the Union troops, shielding your head from falling brick and hot debris. The fort returns fire, but it's mostly symbolic. Their cannons are poorly positioned, their powder damp, their supplies low. They hit little. They hold, but they don't hurt. No one dies during the bombardment, but you know this is a lull, not a pattern. The restraint won't last. It's only the first chapter of a book that's already written in blood. On April 13th, Anderson agrees to surrender, with honors. The Union flag is lowered. The men are allowed to leave safely. The next day, during a ceremonial cannon firing to salute the flag, a misfire explodes, killing a Union soldier. The first death of the war isn't in battle. It's in ceremony. You stand at the edge of the dock as Union soldiers sail north, their backs straight, their hearts heavier than their gear. And on shore? Celebrations. You hear church bells, toasts, parades. Charleston is alive with pride. One woman declares, "We've driven out the invaders." You don't have the heart to tell her the real invasion hasn't even started yet. Now the fuse is lit. Back in Washington, Lincoln reads the telegram and knows the time for careful speeches is over. On April 15th, he issues a proclamation calling for 75,000 troops. It's a volunteer army, meant to last 90 days. You smirk bitterly. 90 days. They thought it would be quick. They thought it would be tidy. Spoiler, it won't be. And the South? Oh, the South hears that proclamation like a bugle in their nightmares. For the Upper South, Lincoln's call to arms feels like a threat, not a defense. Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas had been on the fence. They fall off that fence immediately. By early May, they've joined the Confederacy. And now, the map has changed again, 11 states in rebellion, stretching from Texas to Virginia. But here's where things get messier than even the geography suggests. Because not everyone in the South wants to secede. You make your way to eastern Tennessee, where Unionist sentiment runs deep. You hear farmers and merchants whisper, "This ain't our war." You meet mountain folk who don't own slaves and don't care for cotton politics. One man tells you flat out, "I'll fight if they come here, but I won't march for Jefferson Davis." In Western Virginia, it goes further. Delegates gather and decide they want no part of the Confederacy. They vote to separate from Virginia and form their own loyal state, West Virginia. You watch them scribble out new county lines and start lobbying Congress for recognition. Historians still argue whether this division was legal, moral, or merely convenient, but you're there when the first West Virginian militias drill on hillsides under Union flags. They're not just holding their ground. They're taking sides. You return to Baltimore, Maryland. It's a powder keg with a city council. On April 19th, Union troops pass through on their way to defend Washington. Angry citizens pelt the soldiers with rocks, bricks, and eventually bullets. The Baltimore riot leaves several dead, the first bloodshed of the war involving civilians. Lincoln is watching all this from the White House. He knows D.C. is surrounded by slave states. He knows the capital could fall if Maryland flips. So he acts fast and controversially. You sit in a cabinet meeting as he signs an order suspending habeas corpus, the right to a trial before being detained. Suddenly, pro-secession legislators in Maryland are arrested. No trials. No public defense. You hear Northern critics whisper that Lincoln's becoming a tyrant. But the trains keep rolling, and D.C. holds. The Union is mobilizing. States that had gone sleepy since the Revolution are now waking up with bayonets. Massachusetts regiments march south. Ohio trains its first wave. New York builds makeshift camps in Central Park. Flags unfurl, Bands play, sermons echo from church pulpits. This isn't yet a total war, but the North is preparing for one. In the South, Richmond, Virginia, becomes the Confederate capital. You see Jefferson Davis unpacking crates in the old White House of the Confederacy, wondering if he'll be seen as a patriot or a cautionary tale. Militias become armies. Civilians become soldiers. Rhetoric becomes rifle drills. And now, something subtle shifts. Both sides believe they are defending the true idea of America. That's what makes this Civil War so uniquely tragic. The North says, we are preserving the Union and the Constitution. The South says, we are preserving liberty and states' rights. You want to scream, you can't both be right. But that's the thing. They both think they are. And that's the moment you realize, no battle, no speech, no flag raising can stop this now. This isn't about a single issue anymore. It's about identity. About who gets to say what America means. The silent siege is over. The cannon smoke has lifted. And in its place? Two nations, sharing one soil. Both claiming the same founding fathers. Both convinced the other is the traitor. And both willing to kill to prove it. It's barely dawn, and you're already flinching. The air smells like burnt rope and iron shavings, and your ears ring with the last echo of a Confederate cannon. You crouch in the brush just outside Fort Sumter, trying to figure out if this is a bad dream or the first chapter of something worse. And then another cannon fires. There it is. Boom. The first shots of the Civil War have officially been fired in anger. The sky blooms with smoke. Brick dust rises from the fort like a ghost trying to escape. You can taste salt, gunpowder, and panic. Inside the fort, Union soldiers scramble, are barely rested, underfed, unsure if anyone's coming to help. But they fire back anyway. Small arms, mostly. Their larger cannons are clumsily placed. One soldier mutters, "We're firing uphill from a ditch." You spend the next 34 hours ducking shellfire, running messages, watching Fort Sumter crumble in real time. No one dies in the bombardment, not yet, but that doesn't mean it's harmless. It's psychological. A loud, smoking, irreversible beginning. The kind that makes generals twitch and presidents lose sleep. By the time the Union surrenders the fort and evacuates, it's clear this isn't going to be solved with speeches or emissaries. The United States of America is at war with itself. You travel north, fast, passing through towns waking up to headlines in block letters, "War begins." Fort Sumter falls. The Union strikes back. People line up at newspaper stands. Some cheer. Others shake their heads. One old veteran whispers, "It's finally come." Back in Washington, Lincoln responds immediately. He calls for 75,000 volunteers, men willing to enlist for 90 days, which everyone still foolishly believes will be enough. You watch young men crowd recruitment tents, half drunk on adrenaline and bad guesses. Meanwhile, the South is giddy. Crowds sing Dixie in the streets. In Montgomery, people cheer Jefferson Davis as if he's George Washington reincarnated. He issues his own call for troops, and thousands answer, marching in grey uniforms that don't match and carrying muskets that haven't been cleaned since the War of 1812. You stop in Richmond, where women sew flags and men scribble letters, declaring that they're off to defend Southern rights. It sounds noble, until you read between the lines and see they're defending a system built on human bondage. And now the borders shift. Literally. Newly seceded states redraw their state lines, seize armories, and erect checkpoints. Travel becomes dangerous. You get stopped at a roadblock in Tennessee, accused of being a spy just for having a northern accent. You lie, say you're a sympathizer, and slip through with your teeth clenched. The Mississippi River is no longer a highway, it's a contested border. You watch Union gunboats patrol, Southern River batteries watch from the banks, and every steamboat becomes a potential battlefield. And the press? Oh, they're having a field day. Northern newspapers publish scathing editorials, "Traitors must be crushed." Southern ones call Lincoln a tyrant and shout, "Freedom or death." Political cartoons show Davis as a noble knight or a deranged snake, depending on the paper. You flip through the pages and realize the war is being fought in columns and headlines too. Here's a quirky detail: both sides think the other side will fold quickly. A Southern colonel tells you over brandy, "We'll be in Washington by July." A Union captain laughs in your ear, "We'll march to Richmond in a month." You want to grab them both by the collar and say, "You have no idea what's coming." Because while they're trading boasts, they're also trading battle plans. You sit in on Union briefings in Washington, where General Winfield Scott proposes the now infamous Anaconda Plan, a slow strangulation strategy to blockade Southern ports and squeeze the Confederacy to death. His critics call it cowardly. They want fast, glorious victory. You shake your head. Scott knows better. Meanwhile, the Confederacy shifts into war footing. They appoint Robert E. Lee, yes, that Lee, as head of Virginia's forces. He's offered command of the Union Army, too, but refuses to raise a sword against his home state. You can't decide if it's loyalty or blindness. Troops begin moving. Camps spring up like mushrooms after rain. You visit Camp Cuttin in Pennsylvania, one of the largest Union training grounds. New recruits line up in mismatched uniforms, still figuring out how to hold a rifle. Their boots blister, their shirts don't fit, but their eyes gleam with a strange mix of pride and dread. In the South, you follow a regiment of volunteers in Georgia who march with homemade flags and borrowed horses. Some carry squirrel rifles. Others haven't fired a gun in their life. But they sing loud. They believe. And now, both sides are preparing for a first real battle, not a bombardment, not a standoff, but a clash. All eyes turn to Virginia, the new front line. Why? Because now that Richmond has become the Confederate capital, it's just 100 miles from Washington, D.C. You pace the distance yourself and realize the two capitals are practically neighbors, with a war zone between them. Skirmishes break out across Harper's Ferry, Alexandria, and Manassas. You watch patrols chase shadows through the woods. Spies slip notes in hollow trees. Locals try to pretend life is normal, but you see them glance over their shoulders. In late May, you're in Alexandria when Union troops enter the city. Colonel Elmer Ellsworth, one of Lincoln's personal friends, is among them. He climbs to the top of a hotel to remove a Confederate flag. The hotel owner shoots him point blank. Ellsworth becomes the first Union officer killed in the war. Lincoln weeps. The North roars. You hear the recruiting numbers spike overnight. And still, the myth of a short war holds. Congress authorizes 3-month enlistments. People plan parades for the returning heroes before the first battle even begins. But you know. You've seen the maps. The armories. The letters left behind on kitchen tables. This won't be 3 months. This won't be clean. The first shots have been fired, and now the country is locked in something deeper than battle, the reckoning. Because Fort Sumter wasn't just a fort. It was a line. And that line is now a wound. You press your hand to a cracked wooden fence post somewhere in Kentucky, sweeping over a peaceful-looking valley that's anything but. The hills roll gently, the trees sway in the wind, and on either side of that invisible line ahead, neighbors eye each other like wolves. Welcome to the border states, where loyalty splits not only towns, but families, churches, even dinner tables. You thought the country was divided before? No. This is where division gets personal. For states sit squarely on the Union-Confederate fault line, Kentucky, Missouri, Maryland, and Delaware. All for our slave states that haven't joined the Confederacy. Yet. You start in Kentucky, where things are so tense that for a while, the state declares itself officially neutral. That's right. A whole state saying, nope, we're not picking sides. You hear them call it the middle ground, but it feels more like quicksand. Unionists and Confederates both organize militias in secret. You pass by barns with muskets hidden under hay bales. You hear whispers in church pews about which neighbor has signed up with whom. Some towns fly both flags, side by side, like rival cousins forced to share a bedroom. And then neutrality cracks. In September 1861, Confederate forces occupy Columbus, Kentucky, a strategic point on the Mississippi River. The Union responds immediately, marching troops into the state. Neutrality? Gone. Now the state legislature swings firmly Unionist, though many Kentuckians still fight for the South. You meet one man with a Union jacket and a Confederate belt. He shrugs and says, "I didn't pick this fight. It picked me." You believe him. Then you travel west to Missouri, where the whole situation makes Kentucky look like a book club squabble. Governor Claiborne Fox Jackson is a Confederate sympathizer, but the state's population is divided. When the Union sends General Nathaniel Leon to hold Missouri, the powder keg explodes. Leon marches into St. Louis, arrests pro-Confederate militia members, and as they're being paraded through the streets, the crowd jeers and throws rocks. The soldiers open fire. Dozens of civilians die. You see the aftermath firsthand: bullet holes in shutters, blood drying on cobblestones. They call it the Camp Jackson Affair, and it throws Missouri into chaos. Governor Jackson flees. A Union loyalist government is installed. But the fight isn't over. Not even close. Guerrilla warfare erupts across Missouri. You ride through woods haunted by bushwhackers and jayhawkers. Pro-Confederate and pro-Union militias, respectively. They're irregular, brutal, and accountable to no one. One group slaughters Union sympathizers in the night. Another torches Confederate farms. You ride past a burnt-out homestead where a mother sobs, holding a charred doll. No army did this. Just neighbors. Historians still debate whether Missouri ever really joined the Confederacy. Technically, it had a shadow government that seceded. But Union troops controlled the capital, the railroads, and the banks. It's one of the war's greatest ironies, a state at war with itself under a single flag. You head back east to Maryland, where tensions are dangerously close to the president's doorstep. Lincoln knows the fate of Washington, D.C. depends on keeping Maryland in the Union. If it secedes, the capital is surrounded. So Lincoln acts. He suspends habeas corpus, the right to a fair trial, and has pro-secession legislators arrested preemptively. No charges. No hearings. You walk through Baltimore and feel the unease in the cobblestones. People whisper that the president is becoming a dictator. But others thank him. Because just weeks earlier, Baltimore rioted when Union troops marched through, killing and injuring soldiers. You pass the alley where it happened. Blood still stains the bricks. Lincoln defends his actions by saying, "Are all the laws but one to go unexecuted, and the government itself go to pieces?" You understand his logic. But it still feels like crossing a moral line. Another crack in the Constitution, another scar on the national psyche. In Delaware, things stay quieter. The state has slavery, yes, but it also has a strong Unionist majority. You don't see militias in the streets. But the tension is there. It hums beneath every sermon, every newspaper headline, every quiet conversation in the general store. And here's the fringe fact that sticks with you: thousands of men from every border state fight for both sides. Yes, really. In Kentucky alone, over 100,000 men will serve in the war, split almost evenly between Union and Confederate armies. It's the same in Missouri. You think of families, brothers, entire towns dividing their loyalties like inheritance. You meet two cousins, one in blue, one in gray, who fought at Wilson's Creek on opposite sides. They exchanged fire across a battlefield, then met weeks later under a white flag to bury their uncle. You don't ask what they said to each other. Even inside the same households, the war splits bloodlines. You spend an evening in a farmhouse in western Maryland. The father supports the Union. The eldest son rides with Lee. The youngest boy hasn't chosen yet. He sits at the dinner table staring at his hands. You ask him which side he's leaning toward. He doesn't answer. Just says, "I don't know if I'll get to choose at all." You remember that sentence. Because in the border states, the war is rarely about choosing a side. It's about surviving the middle. There's no safe flag. No clean truth. No tidy line you can draw through these hills and say, this side is right. The conflict swirls, doubles back, and devours itself. Union generals don't always trust the locals. Confederate recruiters don't always get volunteers. Every barn could hide guns. Every church might be spying. Every neighbor might turn on you if the wind shifts. And yet, the strategic importance of these states can't be overstated. Missouri controls the Mississippi River and western routes. Kentucky offers access to the Ohio River and Deep South. Maryland holds Washington's throat. Delaware protects the Union's industrial flank. Lincoln once said, "I hope to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky." You feel that truth in your bones. Because if the border states fall, the Union becomes a northern shell. But if they hold? The South becomes geographically split, constantly looking over its shoulder. And the longer the war drags on, the more those middle ground states become battlefields, not just of bullets, but of belief. You end your journey in the shadow of a crumbling stone bridge. A boy not yet old enough to shave stands guard with a musket too long for his arms. You ask him why he's there. He shrugs. Because they told me I was. And that's the heartbreak of the border states. Sometimes you don't choose the war. Sometimes the war chooses you. You wake to the sound of hammers striking anvils, not blacksmiths, drill sergeants. Outside your tent, boys are transforming into soldiers one clumsy step at a time. It's mid-1861, and the call to arms has officially become a roar. You walk through a freshly built Union camp in Pennsylvania. It smells like sawdust, sweat, and coffee so bad it could take the paint off a barn. Tents dot the fields like mushrooms after rain, and everywhere you turn, someone's learning how to shoot, march, or salute. These men aren't seasoned warriors. They're clerks, carpenters, cobblers, farmers, schoolteachers, and shoeless boys who lied about their age. They enlisted with full stomachs and full hearts, most of them expecting a little adventure, maybe a skirmish or two, and then to be home in time for harvest. You see letters clutched like lifelines, uniforms still missing buttons, and boots 2 sizes too big. They joke about their 90-day service ending before they ever fire a shot. Oh, sweet summer children. Now you hop a train to Richmond, where the Confederates are doing the same thing, recruiting, drilling, arming. The South doesn't have as many men, but what it lacks in numbers it tries to make up in fervor. Here, every enlistment is framed as defending home, hearth, and honor. A teenager from Georgia hands you a pen-scratched diary page that reads, "I do not fear death, but I fear cowardice." They believe this will be their revolution. You believe it'll be their undoing. Confederate camps buzz with the same energy, laughing, drilling, posing for daguerreotypes with borrowed swords and barely grown whiskers. You hear officers calling men gentlemen soldiers. They're proud. They're green. And they're not ready. But nobody is. You hear the press in both North and South baying for action. Politicians want a quick victory to silence doubters. Generals push back, saying their men aren't trained. But war doesn't care about readiness. War loves a stage, and Virginia is about to become one. In July 1861, rumors swirl that the Union will finally strike Richmond. The capital of the Confederacy lies just 100 miles from Washington. Union General Irvin McDowell is ordered to lead a force of about 35,000 south. You ride with them as they march through the countryside toward a small railroad junction called Manassas, where Confederate forces under General Beauregard are gathering. McDowell's troops sing songs, flirt with girls from passing towns, and talk openly about taking Richmond in a week. Some politicians and civilians even pack picnic baskets and follow along, spectators, expecting to watch a battle from a safe hill like it's a summer opera. Oh, it is not. On July 21st, the two armies collide at a creek called Bull Run. The battle begins in chaos. You hear cannon fire at dawn, then screaming orders, confused bayonets, volleys that miss entirely. The Union Army, confident and loud, pushes the Confederates back at first. For a moment, it looks like this will be the quick victory everyone hoped for. Then a stone wall appears. At the top of Henry Hill, Confederate reinforcements arrive under General Thomas Jackson. His brigade stands firm under heavy fire. One Confederate officer points to him and yells, "There is Jackson, standing like a stone wall." And just like that, a legend is born. You can almost hear the nickname click into place, Stonewall Jackson. The Confederates rally. Counterattack. Union lines buckle. What follows is panic. Union soldiers, untrained and overwhelmed, begin to retreat. Then they run. Then they break. The road back to Washington turns into a traffic jam of wagons, wounded men, fleeing civilians, and shattered illusions. You stand to the side of the road as soldiers throw down their rifles just to run faster. One weeps openly, covered in mud and blood. Another mutters, "I thought this would be glorious." No one calls it that anymore. The First Battle of Bull Run is a Confederate victory, but it's not clean. Thousands lie dead or wounded. Neither side truly knew what they were doing. It was a brawl between two untested mobs, dressed up in pageantry and prophecy. But the outcome? Clear. The war won't be short. It won't be pretty. It won't be simple. And for both sides, recruitment skyrockets afterward, not because of glory, but because now the cause feels real. You move through towns in Ohio and Indiana where mothers line up their sons outside draft stations, tears on their cheeks, hands trembling. You pass a telegraph office in Georgia where the operator reads a casualty list aloud and a crowd of women collapses in grief. And yet, more men sign up. Because now, both North and South understand, this war is bigger than honor. It's survival. The Union reorganizes fast. Lincoln fires McDowell and brings in George B. McClellan, a young, confident general with great posture and even greater self-esteem. You sit in on one of his briefings. He talks about drilling, supply lines, and building the army right. He writes to his wife about saving the nation. He calls Lincoln the well-meaning baboon. You chuckle. He has no idea what's coming for him. Meanwhile, the Confederacy celebrates, but cautiously. They know the Union outnumbers and outproduces them. You hear one Southern general say, "We win by not losing. If we make the North bleed long enough, they'll walk away." The strategy becomes clear: drag it out, make it painful, protect their territory. The South doesn't need to conquer the North. They just need to survive long enough to make the war seem pointless to Union voters. You walk through a Confederate hospital, newly built and already overcrowded. The doctor uses a saw with no sterilization. The patient bites down on a belt. You leave quickly. Back in the North, the draft looms, but for now, it's volunteers. You hear speeches in Boston, New York, and Chicago, filled with calls for patriotism and revenge. One preacher says, "This is our trial by fire. We shall emerge purified." You doubt that. And now a new complication arises, the question of enslaved people. What happens when they run to Union lines? Some Union generals call them contraband, refusing to return them. Others see them as military assets, guides, laborious, even spies. You visit a camp where a group of escaped enslaved men are building a fort. One says, "I ain't free yet, but I ain't going back." The war is changing, and fast. What began as a fight to preserve the Union is already rubbing up against the fight to end slavery. But most soldiers don't talk about that yet. They talk about home. About pay. About the next march. You see them writing letters by candlelight, always ending with, "I'll be home soon." And you sit there, knowing many of them won't. The call to arms has turned into a march of ghosts. And the 90-day war has officially turned into a war with no end in sight. You trudge through knee-deep mud just outside Washington, D.C., dodging a supply cart stuck in the muck and listening to a drummer boy curse under his breath. It's late 1861 now, and the war has settled into a shape you didn't expect, not North versus South, but something more jagged, more complicated. The battle lines are forming, yes. But the motives? The alliances? The reasons men carry rifles and raise flags? They are not nearly as tidy. You look at the Union Army, now a massive, churning force swelling with fresh recruits. Their reasons for fighting stretch across the horizon. Some march to preserve the Union. Some to punish the traitors. Some just want steady pay and a uniform. And others? Others are already whispering what many still fear to say aloud: end slavery. You pause at a Union mess tent in Ohio and overhear a heated conversation. One man says, "I didn't sign up to free anybody, I just want to keep this country together." Another snaps back, "How can we preserve liberty if half the country denies it to millions?" Neither of them is wrong. And both of them are fighting on the same side. Meanwhile, you head down south, boots covered in red clay, the heat sticking to your back like guilt. The Confederate Army isn't as large or well supplied, but its spirit is fierce. Soldiers speak in tones full of pride and fatalism. One man from Mississippi shows you a photograph of his family and says, "They think we're fighting for slavery. But I'm fighting because some Yankee wants to tell me what to do." That's the crux of it. The South sees itself as resisting invasion, not defending slavery, at least that's what many soldiers claim. But you've seen the Confederate Constitution. You've heard Vice President Alexander Stephens say that slavery is the cornerstone of their new nation. You know the truth they won't always name. Slavery isn't a side issue. It's the foundation. And yet, not everyone in the South owns slaves. Most don't. Poor white farmers join militias to defend Southern rights, even if they've never owned a person in their life. You watch a 17-year-old from Georgia scribble states' rights on his canteen. No one tells him he's also protecting the plantation down the road. You ride with Confederate officers, many of whom are West Point graduates. These aren't wild-eyed rebels, they are trained, polished, and deadly serious. You visit Robert E. Lee's camp. He's courteous, reserved, deeply religious, and utterly loyal to Virginia. Not the Confederacy, not slavery, Virginia. To him, that's all that matters. Historians still argue whether Lee chose duty over conscience. He opposed secession, he hated slavery's cruelty, and yet he led its army. You wonder if he even knows what he stands for anymore. But in war, loyalty gets narrower every day. And in both armies, you see another truth: immigrants are everywhere. In Union camps, you hear German, Polish, Irish, and Italian. You visit a brigade where entire regiments speak only German. The Irish brigade fights under a green flag with a harp on it. Many fled famine in Ireland only to die on battlefields in America. Why do they fight? One Irishman laughs and says, "For pay. For honor. For whiskey. Take your pick." In the South, immigration is rarer but still present. You meet French-speaking Louisianans, Creole officers, and even a few reluctant Germans dragged into the fray by loyalty to their adopted homeland. It's not just white men either. You walk past enslaved black men building Confederate trenches, cooking meals, tending to officers' horses. They're not soldiers, but they're working under guard, under fear, under force. Some are promised freedom. Few ever see it. You pause at a crossroads where everything blurs. Some Union generals are still returning escaped slaves to their owners, trying not to offend the border states. Others are harboring them as contraband of war. You see a group of enslaved people behind Union lines, confused and hopeful, waiting for orders that don't come. And then you feel the whisper rise: what is this war really about? Preserving the Union? Ending slavery? Defending states' rights? You hear a soldier from Indiana say, "It started as one thing. It's turning into something else." He's right. You attend speeches in New York where politicians say, "Let the South go." Then you attend sermons in Boston that thunder, "We fight not just for a flag, but for the soul of mankind." The North itself is divided. Some want to crush the rebellion but keep slavery intact. Others want to crush slavery and rebuild the nation from scratch. And the South? Some just want independence. Others want a slave empire that stretches into Latin America. You actually read a southern newspaper that fantasized about Cuba and Nicaragua joining the Confederacy. You laugh, and then realize they're not joking. This isn't just a war of muskets and maps. It's a war of visions. And it's turning fast. By the end of 1861, the Union's early blunders, Bull Run, Bull's Bluff, have humbled their expectations. Lincoln now knows the war won't end by Christmas. McClellan's army drills endlessly but refuses to fight. He calls himself the young Napoleon but acts more like a stage actor afraid of missing his cue. Meanwhile, Confederate victories embolden the South, but there's a dark edge growing. You hear whispers about cotton diplomacy, the idea that England and France will join the war to save their textile industries. Southern planters have withheld cotton exports, hoping to force Europe's hand. But instead, European mills pivot to Egyptian and Indian cotton. Britain stays out, for now. The gamble is failing. And food shortages begin creeping into southern towns. You walk through Richmond, where bread lines form. A woman hands you a note meant for her son in uniform. "We have no flour, but I saved you the last of the lard." You tuck it in your coat and say nothing. You return to Washington to find Lincoln pacing, literally pacing the floor of the White House. His cabinet bickers. The newspapers rip him apart. And yet, he starts to speak more openly about freedom, equality, and the higher purpose of this war. But not yet. Not officially. He knows he has to wait until the country is ready. Until victory feels possible. Until the cause outweighs the risk. In both capitals, the war still wears its old disguise, preserve the Union. But underneath? You hear something rising. You hear chains rattling. Then breaking. You hear the roar of thousands of people who have never had a voice, stepping forward in the margins of every battle, every speech, every campfire conversation. The war is becoming something different now. Not a battle between two regions, but a battle between two ideas of what America is supposed to be. You duck into the shadows of a crumbling barn just outside Winchester, Virginia, heart-thumping, breath-ragged. The woods around you are alive, not with birdsong, but with whispers and secrets. Tonight isn't about battles or bayonets. It's about information and who controls it. Welcome to the Quiet War. This is where you meet the spies, saboteurs, and secret strings pulling at both the Union and the Confederacy. And trust me, it's far messier than any map or musket. You start with a name whispered in Union halls like a prayer or a curse, Allan Pinkerton. You know him now as the founder of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, but in 1861. His Lincoln spymaster, his very own Sherlock Holmes with less charm and more sideburns. Pinkerton runs the Union Intelligence Service, and though he's a better detective than general, he's one of the first to organize field agents, gather troop counts, and monitor railroads. You walk with him through makeshift offices filled with candlelit maps, coded messages, and men nervously chewing tobacco. He calls it the Secret Service, long before it becomes official. One of his agents is a freedman named John Scobell, who poses as a slave to infiltrate Confederate camps. Another is a woman, Kate Warne, the first female detective in American history. You watch her disguise herself as a Southern belle to charm secrets out of Confederate officers at hotel bars. She's not just acting. She's risking her life. You follow her through a smoky parlor, notebook hidden in her corset, eyes sharper than any dagger. She never carries a weapon, just information. And that's deadlier. Meanwhile, the Confederacy builds its own spy network, quieter but no less cunning. In Washington, D.C., Southern sympathizers slip in and out of boarding houses and back rooms, feeding information to Richmond by courier or ciphered telegram. You lean in as Rosa Neal Greenhow, a well-connected D.C. socialite, hosts Union officers for tea in her parlor. What they don't know. She's feeding their plans to Confederate generals, tucked into her daughter's doll, sewn into quilts, or whispered behind a fan. Her intel helps the South win Bull Run. Eventually, she's caught, placed under house arrest. But even then, she keeps writing. Her loyalty to the South is unshakable. She's later sent to Europe to lobby for Confederate support. You stand beside her as she sails to England, corset tight with coins and letters. She dies on the way back, drowned when her boat capsizes, weighted down by her own secrets. And then there's the quiet war behind enemy lines, the kind fought by the Underground Railroad, which hasn't stopped just because the war started. If anything, it's more active than ever. You ride with Harriet Tubman, now working directly for the Union Army. Not just as a nurse or cook, though she does both, but as a scout, a guide, a spy. In 1863, she leads a Union raid on the Combahee River in South Carolina, guiding gunboats through the swamps to free over 700 enslaved people in a single night. You crouch beside her in the reeds, watching the flames rise in the distance. Her face is calm, composed. She doesn't speak much, but when she does, you lean in. Every word is heavy with belief. She says, God's time is always near. You believe her. Meanwhile, you visit Union telegraph offices, places buzzing with Morse code and barely cooled wires. Messages are intercepted, scrambled, duplicated. You meet a team of operators who speak only in codebooks and ciphers, writing with invisible ink made from milk or lemon juice. Some spies are less glamorous, more tragic. You meet Dr. Samuel Mudd, the Maryland physician who will one day set John Wilkes Booth's broken leg and be branded a conspirator. For now, he's just a Southern sympathizer with too many secrets. You pass a Confederate messenger hiding in a hay cart, breathing through a hole in the floorboards. You watch Union officers debate whether to burn a rail bridge or save it for their own advance. You begin to see how this war isn't just won by armies. It's won by knowledge. In the South, the railroads are more fragile, so the telegraph becomes king. You observe Confederate operators working with almost no wire, splicing connections with salvaged nails and raw copper. Sometimes they move messages by hand, horseback relays across dangerous territory. You cross into Tennessee, now occupied by Union forces, where Southern spies pose as preachers, bakers, and even children. A young girl delivers pies to Union camps laced with notes baked into the crust. You eat around the edge, amused and disturbed. And here's a bizarre tidbit, one of the North's best field agents is a balloonist. You heard that right. Thaddeus Lowe, aeronaut and inventor, creates the Union Army Balloon Corps. With tethered balloons, he rises over Confederate lines, spotting troop movements and artillery positions. You climb into the basket beside him, hanging above a battlefield in Virginia, and your heart thunders with each gust of wind. Below, soldiers look like ants. You can see the entire theater. He sketches it quickly, shouting coordinates to a man below, who relays them to Union artillery. It's not perfect, balloons are slow, awkward, and terrifyingly flammable, but it's revolutionary. The Confederacy tries to copy the idea, but lacks the resources. You hear rumors of a Southern balloon built from silk dresses donated by wealthy women. One soldier quips, "We're gonna win this war with crinoline and courage." Spoiler, they don't. Back on the ground, the psychological war escalates. You read propaganda pamphlets dropped behind enemy lines, some real, some forged. A Confederate handbill warns Southern soldiers that black Union troops will burn their homes. A Union paper claims Confederate officers are hoarding gold and starving their own men. Truth? Lies? Doesn't matter. The goal is confusion. You walk through a Confederate camp where soldiers burn their own bridges to deny them to the advancing Union. You pass a Northern camp where a false map leads a regiment in circles for 2 days. The war isn't just in lines, it's in shadows. And the biggest shadow? Fear. Fear of sabotage. Fear of betrayal. You feel it in every command tent. Officers double-check their orders, question their aides, arrest their own men for looking too long at a map. You see a Union colonel court-martial a soldier for speaking with a Southern accent. The line between spy and civilian has vanished. This is what war does, it teaches you to distrust everyone, even your reflection. You spend your final night this week in a tiny Union signal station, listening to an operator tap out code with fingers trembling from cold and nerves. He tells you he's heard messages that changed the course of entire battles. One code crack saved 1,000 men. Another cost a general his job. You ask if he's ever seen the front lines. He shrugs. I don't have to. I just move the pieces. And that's the quiet truth of this quiet war. The cannon fire makes the headlines. But the whispers? The rumors? The coded notes stuffed in pies, sewn into hems, hidden in shoe soles? They're the real fuse. And somewhere in all that static, between spy and saboteur, between freedom fighter and traitor, you realize. This war isn't just being fought. It's being surveilled. You sit in the back of a crowded church in Boston, where the pews creak under the weight of grief, and the air is thick with incense and sweat. Up front, a preacher leans over the pulpit, voice rising like cannon fire, God weeps for his country today. But it's not just sermons echoing through this war. It's poems, songs, paintings, letters. The battlefield spills into the page, the canvas, the stage. These are the voices in the smoke, trying to make sense of a country unraveling in real time. You close your eyes and hear them, Union boys singing around campfires, their harmonies raw and aching. One song catches your ear more than any other. John Brown's body lies amouldering in the grave. But his soul is marching on. It's raucous and defiant, borrowed from a hymn, repurposed into a war cry. Soldiers stomp their boots to it. Some grin. Others go quiet. They know John Brown's raid didn't start this war, but his ghost walks with them now. You walk among stacks of sheet music in Philadelphia. Wartime publishers can't keep up. New songs roll off the presses daily, some stirring patriotism, others satirical and sharp. One tune mocks Confederate rationing with the line, "Here's your sweet potato coffee and your sorghum jam surprise." Another mourns a dead lover, "I'll hang my harp on the willow tree, and go to war no more." You spend the evening in a camp outside Nashville, where a violinist plays on a battered instrument missing its E string. The tune is slow, haunting. Men close their eyes, their plates half finished. A drummer taps his foot in time. One whispers, "Sounds like home, don't it?" And then there's poetry, poured out in letters, published in newspapers, scribbled on the backs of ration cards. In New York, a young editor named Walt Whitman pens verses that bleed. He volunteers in war hospitals, tending to the wounded and dying, their blood staining his boots. His poems shift from romantic to raw. You read? I sit with the wounded and dying. As night drapes the barracks in shadow. And the silence swells larger than any cannon. Whitman becomes a quiet legend, his notebook like a second heart. In the Confederacy, poetry swells too, full of pride and defiance. Women write to soldiers at the front with folded poems inside. One woman in Georgia pens, "Though hunger walks with us, and fire takes the rest, the gray shall rise still noble, still blessed." But here's the twist, a lot of this writing comes from women. With so many men at war, women are suddenly publishing, painting, organizing. You visit a Union homefront newspaper run entirely by women. In one editorial, a widow writes, "We keep the hearth and hold the line. We are not just the home, they fight for us, and with us." In Richmond, a Southern woman begins keeping a journal. You read it years later. Her words crackle. "I sew uniforms by day, bury the hungry by night. I curse the war but cheer for our boys. I have never hated and loved so fiercely in the same breath." This war isn't just being fought with guns. It's being fought in memory, even as it's still happening. You meet a Union general who carries a copy of Shakespeare's Henry V into every battle. He reads aloud before combat, quoting, "Once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more." His men don't understand every word, but they get the feeling. That rush of desperation laced with courage. That sense that story shapes reality. Then you see the political cartoons, bold ink, brutal truths. In the North, newspapers draw Jefferson Davis as a snake, or worse, a British puppet. In the South, Lincoln appears as a baboon in a crown, or a vulture perched on a tombstone. You chuckle, then shudder. Art has teeth now. And photography, oh, photography changes everything. You stand in a tent beside Matthew Brady, the most famous war photographer in the Union. He adjusts his bulky camera, waits 15 minutes for the perfect exposure, and captures stillness in the storm. Then he shows you what he's made. A photo of dead soldiers at Antietam Creek, their faces turned to the sky. Another of a young Confederate prisoner, eyes wide with fear and defiance. These aren't paintings. They're real. People line up in northern cities to see Brady's exhibits. They're shocked. Some are sickened. One woman faints. Because until now, war has been glorious from a distance. But through the lens? It's rotting boots, burned barns, and empty eyes. You spend a rainy day paging through soldier letters at a Union depot. One says, "Tell my sister I kept my Bible under my coat." Another reads, "The mud came up to my knees and I still dream of peaches." And the humor, it doesn't vanish. Even in hell, soldiers find ways to laugh. In a Confederate trench outside Corinth, a soldier carves a fake rat from a potato and places it in his sergeant's mess tin. The laughter echoes down the line. A Union soldier writes home, "I may not have whiskey, but I've learned to whistle Dixie through my teeth." You meet cartoonists sketching battlefield jokes, a Union soldier chasing his runaway horse labeled strategy. A Confederate with a sign on his back, "Out to lunch, back in 4 months." They're not trying to win the war. They're just trying to stay sane. And above it all, the preachers, the prophets, the public speakers fan the flames higher. In the North, abolitionist orators like Frederick Douglass speak with thunder in their lungs. You stand in the back of a hall in Rochester as he declares, "This war, whether you know it or not, is God's answer to America's original sin." His words ripple through the audience. One boy weeps. One woman nods so hard she nearly falls off her seat. In the South, the pulpit burns just as hot. Ministers declare this a holy war to preserve tradition, hierarchy, God's natural order. A preacher in Alabama tells you, "We fight not just for land, but for the divine structure of mankind." You wonder if he hears the chains rattling behind his words. Somewhere in Tennessee, you meet a soldier-turned-poet who writes verses on scraps of tree bark. He reads you one. "The smoke chokes my songs, but still I sing. Because if we stop singing, we've already lost. And now, you understand. The muskets speak in one language. The cannons roar another. But these songs, poems, sketches, and whispers, they're the voices trying to remember what's worth saving. Because this war is not just a fight over territory or tariffs. It's a battle over meaning. Over truth. Over what America tells itself about itself. And even as soldiers fall, ink flows. Even as limbs shatter, guitars strum. Even as families break, stories bloom. This isn't just a civil war. It's a cultural wildfire. And the voices in the smoke? They're still singing. Even now. You squint into a sunrise thick with ash, standing atop a ridge in western Virginia, watching 2 distant armies shift like storm clouds across the valley floor. Below, smoke curls from chimneys, birds scatter, and the roads pulse with men moving in columns, some blue, some grey, all marching straight into history's mouth. The war has reached its point of no return. No more hoping it'll be over in a month. No more hedging about motives. No more illusions. You feel it in the earth, a nation now committed. It's early 1862, and the scale of the conflict has changed overnight. In Washington, the Union's war machine kicks into full gear. Lincoln, once cautious and diplomatic, now stands firm and grave. His hair looks grayer. His voice is steel-wrapped in sorrow. You sit in on a meeting with his cabinet, where he says quietly, "We shall nobly save, or meanly lose, the last best hope of earth." That's not a campaign speech. That's a prayer. He appoints new generals. He fires others. He walks among the sick. He writes letters to widows. Every day, he reads the casualty lists, his lips moving in silence. You think he may never smile again. The Union Army now numbers in the hundreds of thousands, its blue-clad soldiers moving with better drills, better gear, and deeper resolve. In the West, Ulysses S. Grant rises quickly. You ride beside him through snow-slick Tennessee, where he captures Fort Donelson with grim efficiency. When the Confederates ask for terms, he replies with words that shake the South. No terms except unconditional and immediate surrender. From that moment on, they call him Unconditional Surrender Grant, a name both admired and feared. Meanwhile, the Confederacy tightens its belts and prepares for a long haul. The idea of a fast victory has crumbled like burnt parchment. But the South is dug in, literally and figuratively. Every inch of territory matters. Every creek, every hill. They don't need to win, they just need to not lose. You visit Richmond, where Jefferson Davis tries to project calm while fires flicker in his eyes. He juggles politics, supply shortages, and complaints from generals. He believes the South's willpower will outlast the North's stomach for war. His supporters call him a hero. His enemies call him a glorified clerk. In both capitals, the war becomes systemic. Taxes are raised. Factories are repurposed. Telegraphs buzz like angry bees. Women take over farms, workshops, and hospitals. You stand with a mother in Georgia who smears lye soap on her hands and says, "This war won't wait for the men to come home. We do it now or not at all." And the casualties, they're no longer counted in dozens. They're counted in thousands. You step onto the fields of Shiloh in April 1862, where Union and Confederate forces clash in woods so dense you can't tell friend from foe until the muzzle flashes. Over 23,000 men are killed, wounded, or missing. It's a massacre without the benefit of meaning. You help a surgeon hold down a boy while his leg is amputated. The bone saw screeches. The boy bites through leather. Afterward, the surgeon throws up behind a tree. This is war now. And no one's pretending otherwise. Back in the East, McClellan finally moves his giant Army of the Potomac. He plans the Peninsula Campaign, trying to capture Richmond from the southeast. He has numbers. He has strategy. But he doesn't have nerve. You ride alongside his staff and feel the constant hesitation. He believes he's outnumbered when he isn't. He thinks every Confederate whisper is a full division. He writes grand dispatches to Washington, but rarely acts. Lincoln sighs, he has the slows. The campaign falters. And from the Confederate lines? A counterpunch. Enter Robert E. Lee, now in full command of the Army of Northern Virginia. No longer just a quiet officer from West Point, now he's a symbol. His soldiers chant his name. His tactics surprise the North. You watch him pull off daring flanking moves, use terrain like a chessboard, and inspire his troops with both calm and command. He's not infallible. But in 1862, he's dangerous. Under Lee, the South goes from defensive to offensive. He pushes back McClellan, then launches the Northern Virginia campaign. He clashes with Union forces at the Second Battle of Bull Run, another bloody Confederate victory. You see McClellan's men fall back again. Retreat again. And you begin to realize, this war is not just dragging on. It's mutating. And now the international world watches. Britain and France flirt with recognizing the Confederacy, still wooed by cotton and the idea of a broken America. You sit in on a London tea where a British official says, surely the North cannot subdue such resistance. But they're hesitant. And Lincoln knows he must shift the narrative. He waits for a victory. Just one solid win to give him the high ground. And then, in September 1862, it comes, barely. At Antietam, the bloodiest single day in American history, over 22,000 men fall in 12 hours. You crouch in the sunken road later called Bloody Lane, where the dead are piled 3 deep. The ground is so red you can't tell where the soil ends and the suffering begins. But it's a Union strategic victory. Lee retreats. And Lincoln sees his moment. 5 days later, he announces the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. It declares that all enslaved people in rebel-held territories will be forever free as of January 1, 1863. You stand in the White House hallway as Lincoln signs the paper with a hand trembling not from doubt, but exhaustion. He says softly, "If my name ever goes into history, it'll be for this act." And with that, the war changes again. It's no longer just about union. It's about freedom. The moral stakes rise. European nations pause. The Confederacy howls. Some Union officers resign in protest. But thousands more freed black men flock to Union lines, ready to fight, not for a theory, but for their own future. You meet one in a Union camp outside South Carolina. He tells you, "If I die for something real. For me. For my people." You nod. You try not to cry. Now the war is fire in full. Railways glow at night from troop movement. Telegraph lines hum with urgent orders. Supply chains stretch across entire states. The South tightens its grip. The North sharpens its sword. And the generals, the famous ones, start to earn their names. Sherman rises, grizzled and intense. Grant pushes forward with relentless determination. Lee becomes a legend whispered in both fear and admiration. Even Lincoln changes. You see it in his eyes. He is no longer merely a president trying to hold things together. He is now a wartime commander, morally anchored, spiritually haunted, and, still, quietly hopeful. He visits hospitals. He rides out to see camps. He speaks not of quick victory, but of unfinished work. And across both North and South, soldiers begin to realize there may be no going back. Even if peace is declared, even if the shooting stops, nothing will ever be the same. You sit with a group of men beside a Virginia creek. One says, "What happens if we win?" Another replies, "I'm more scared of what happens if we don't." No one laughs. Because now, everyone is in it. The fences have been burned. The crops have been trampled. The illusions are gone. The war owns them. It owns their stories. Their songs. Their scars. Their futures. The North will not stop until the Union stands whole again. The South will not yield unless its knees are broken. And you, a knees in the mud, boots worn thin, notebook full of names and stories, you feel the weight of it too. This is no longer about what started the war. It's about what it has become. The wind moves low across the fields of Virginia, as if even the weather has learned to whisper. You walk a dirt road that has seen too many boots, hooves, and wheels to pretend it's anything but what it is, a path into cataclysm. It's now early 1863, and the war has become something no one planned, predicted, or can control. Not just a clash of armies. Not even just a fight over slavery. It is a total national unraveling, political, spiritual, emotional. You see it everywhere. In the faces of men who have been fighting for 2 years and can no longer remember what quiet feels like. In the cities where bread riots break out because flour has become rarer than gold. In farmsteads where children carry buckets because all the adults are gone or dead. Every mile you walk toward the heart of the war, the more it feels like the country has fallen into itself like a rotting tree. The trunk is still standing. But everything beneath? Hollow. You're riding through Tennessee now, where the Battle of Stones River just ended. It was technically a Union victory, but the locals don't celebrate. They just rebuild fences and bury bodies. You stop to talk to a woman picking her way through broken timbers. She says, "I can't tell which side won. The dead don't seem to care." There's a moment of silence so deep it feels like prayer. Back in Washington, Lincoln reads casualty reports like eulogies. In private, he speaks less. Smiles less. The war has aged him 20 years in two. But in public, he steadies the nation's trembling hand. And soon, with the stroke of his pen, he fulfills the promise he made months ago. On January 1, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation takes effect. You're there when it's read aloud in Union camps. Men stop eating. They stand up. For a moment, no one breathes. And then, slowly, some begin to cheer. Others cry. A few kneel. One black soldier, just recruited, presses the paper to his chest and whispers, "Now I know why I fight." In the South, the reaction is rage and fear. Confederate papers scream that Lincoln has declared war on their way of life. You hear plantation owners mutter, "If we weren't fighting for slavery before, we sure are now." And quietly, in the dark corners of Richmond, they know, this war cannot end without answering that question. And then comes Gettysburg. But not yet. Before that, the country must hold its breath. Because all roads, political, military, moral, are now pointing toward a moment of collision. In the West, Grant takes Vicksburg, cutting the Confederacy in half along the Mississippi. In the East, Lee plans a daring move, an invasion of the North itself. You walk with Confederate soldiers into Pennsylvania, past shocked farmers and angry locals. They're hungry, barefoot, and angry. Some sing. Most just march, knowing the next battle could break the stalemate, or break them. At the same time, in the North, draft riots erupt in New York City. Poor men, mostly immigrants, riot in the streets, enraged by conscription laws that allow the wealthy to buy their way out. You stand on a rooftop as mobs burn buildings, hang effigies, and, horrifyingly, lynch black citizens in the streets. It is one of the darkest moments in the North's moral arc. And you see the irony, fighting a war to end slavery, while racism boils over in your own backyard. You look around and wonder, can this country even survive its own contradictions? And then you arrive in Gettysburg, July 1863. You can smell battle before you hear it. 3 days of chaos, thunder, blood, and smoke. Union and Confederate troops lock horns in the largest battle of the war. You stand on Little Round Top as Union soldiers repel wave after wave of gray coats. You kneel beside the peach orchard, where men die by the dozens to claim a single acre. And then comes Pickett's charge, a tragic, stunning, hopeless assault across open fields into Union artillery fire. You watch them fall in rows. You can't even see the grass anymore. Only men. And silence. Afterward, both sides pull back. Over 50,000 casualties in 3 days. The South will never again have the strength to invade the North. But the North? Still bleeding. Still unsure. Months later, Lincoln visits Gettysburg. You stand near the crowd as he delivers a short, awkwardly received speech that begins, "47 years ago." It lasts barely 2 minutes. You'll remember it forever. And with that speech, with that moment, the war stops being just a war. It becomes a refounding. A fight for what the nation could be, not just what it was. You look back on all of it, the compromises, the courtrooms, the slave auctions, the election maps, the broadswords at Harper's Ferry. And you see it now for what it truly is. A trap. A slow-building, generational trap made of greed, fear, arrogance, and silence. And now that trap has sprung. The two halves of America are locked in a death grip, and neither can let go without losing everything. The war has passed the point of negotiation. Now it must end in decisive triumph or utter collapse. You sit on a porch with a Union nurse who's seen too many wounded boys. She says, "This isn't just war. This is judgment." And it is. Because the reckoning isn't only between North and South. It's within every state. Every town. Every family. Every person. The war has become a mirror, and everyone's being forced to look. And now, as the cannons fade into memory and the smoke dissolves over broken fields, you step quietly out of history's deepest wound. Your boots are heavy with mud. Your ears ring with the echoes of bugles and last words. But above all, it's the silence now that wraps around you. The kind of silence that comes only after a long, terrible storm. You sit beneath an old tree where nothing grows anymore. The breeze is soft. The air smells of grass, not gunpowder. And for the first time in this long, blood-stained journey, you feel a stillness that isn't emptiness. It's relief. The war hasn't ended yet, not by a long shot. But the moment has passed. The point where it all could have been prevented. Where dialogue might have saved lives. That door is closed now, bolted tight. And what comes next? Gettysburg, Vicksburg, Sherman's March, Appomattox, that will be the unraveling of the thread that started years before the first shot. So you breathe. Slowly. Deeply. This war started with words, pamphlets, declarations, prayers, lies. And it will end with more words, surrender letters, amendments, and eulogies. History will write its volumes. But tonight, you can let it go. You did the hard part. You listened. And maybe, just maybe, that's where healing begins. Now, lie back. Let the noise fall away. Let the fireflies come out. Let the night hold you. You made it. Sleep well.